Section 1. The Surface. What everyone thinks they know about Springfield. Let's start somewhere comfortable, somewhere familiar. Picture the opening credits. That yellow sun over a cartoon skyline, the school bus, the shopping cart, the saxophone. Homer sliding through the garage door, just in time to squeeze between Marge and Maggie on the couch before the television swallows them all whole. You've seen it hundreds of times, maybe thousands. It lives in a part of your brain that's been there so long, it feels structural, like it was always there and always will be. The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989. Most people reading or listening to this weren't all alive yet. Some were very young. A handful were old enough to remember the broadcast and the strange feeling of watching this loud, ugly, wonderful cartoon family tumble across the screen for the first time. The sense that something had shifted in American culture that Sunday night, quietly and permanently, the way the best shifts always happen. The show has now run for 36 seasons, 788 episodes at the time of this writing, with more on the way. It is the longest-running American animated series ever made, the longest-running sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television anywhere. No other show, animated or otherwise, has come close to that number. Not Gunsmoke, not Law and Order, not Doctor Who. The Simpsons stands alone. And yet, for most people, the relationship with the show is strangely personal. Not the way you're a fan of a band or a sports team. More like the way you have a relationship with a house you grew up in. You don't think about it constantly, but it's there. It shaped something. The jokes are in your vocabulary. The characters are in your dreams occasionally. Homer's voice lives somewhere in the lower registers of your memory. And if someone says the right word, there it is again. Warm and familiar, and a little bit absurd. That's what this video is. A long, slow walk through Springfield at night, after everyone has gone to bed. A gentle expedition through what most people think they know about the show, and then carefully, without hurry, into the deeper places. The stranger layers. The questions the show has been sitting with for 36 years, the ones it introduced and never resolved. The ones that fans have spent decades unraveling in forums and comment threads and late-night conversations that went longer than anyone planned. This is not a fast video. There's nothing to rush toward. The theories will still be there when we arrive. Springfield will still be there. It always is. So get comfortable. Find a position that works. Let your breathing slow, and let's begin at the very beginning, with the things on the surface, the things everyone knows, because even there, even in the most familiar corners of the show, there are things that deserve a second look. Springfield, as a concept, was designed to be everywhere. Matt Groening named it after Springfield, Oregon, partly because he grew up near there, but mostly because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America. There's a Springfield in nearly every state. There's probably one within a few hundred miles of wherever you are right now. Groening wanted the town to feel universal. He wanted every viewer, regardless of where they grew up, to recognize something in it. The diner on the corner, the factory by the river, the elementary school that smells slightly of mold, the nuclear plant just outside of town that everyone tries not to think about. It worked. It worked almost too well. Because the thing about Springfield is that it doesn't just feel universal in an abstract, this could be anywhere way. It feels universal in a specifically American way. It has the particular texture of a mid-size American town that peaked sometime in the middle of the 20th century and has been coasting on that memory ever since. The infrastructure is aging. The economy is held together by one major employer and a collection of small businesses that seem to change what they're selling depending on what the episode needs. The local government is corrupt in a lazy, familiar way rather than a dramatic one. Nobody in charge is particularly evil. They're just comfortable and incurious and slightly overweight, the way most people in power in small towns tend to be. Moe's Tavern has been there forever. The Quick E-Mart has been there forever. Springfield Elementary has been there forever. The nuclear plant on the edge of town has been there forever. These aren't just set dressings. They're load-bearing walls of the Springfield mythology. Remove any one of them and the whole structure wobbles. The town breathes through these landmarks. They are the circulatory system of the place, and the people who work in them, Mo the bartender, Apu the convenience store owner, Principal Skinner with his mother issues and his Vietnam flashbacks. They are the blood. And at the center of all of it, on Evergreen Terrace, in a house that is always slightly yellow, even under whatever light the episode chooses to use, the Simpsons family. Five people who are somehow simultaneously the most ordinary family in America and the most extraordinary. Homer, big and slow and kind in the careless way that people are kind when they haven't thought too hard about the world. Marge, patient to a degree that stretches credibility across 36 seasons but never quite breaks it. Bart, the it of American boyhood, the part of every kid that wants to throw something through a window and see what happens. Lisa, the conscience the show keeps arguing with. And Maggie in the background, watching everything, saying nothing, the pacifier moving occasionally like punctuation at the end of a sentence nobody else heard. The setup is so simple it barely registers as a setup. Family lives in town. Father works at plant. Kids go to school. Hijinks ensue. Credits roll. Repeat 788 times. And yet here we are. 36 years later, still watching. Still finding things. Still pulling at threads that turn out to go somewhere strange and deep and occasionally heartbreaking. That's the first thing worth understanding about The Simpsons. The surface is simple on purpose. The simplicity is load-bearing. It has to be uncomplicated on top so that everything underneath it has somewhere to hide. Let's talk about what the show is actually about, not the plots. The plots are vehicles. What the show is actually about, the thing it returns to in its best episodes, and gestures toward even in its worst ones, is the gap between what we want our lives to be and what they actually are. Homer wants to be a good father. He fails constantly. He fails spectacularly, in ways that would end a real family, in ways that get reset by the next episode and smoothed over and forgotten. But the wanting is real. It's in every episode. Even the ones where he's at his most selfish or most oblivious, there's this undercurrent of a man who knows he's not quite what he should be, who reaches for something better and misses, who keeps reaching anyway because the alternative is giving up, and giving up is the one thing Homer Simpson has never been able to do. Marge wants a husband who sees her, not just loves her, which Homer does, in his clumsy, enormous way, but sees her. She wants someone who notices when she's unhappy, who asks what's wrong and actually waits for the answer. She gets Homer, who is loving and present and constitutionally incapable of recognizing emotional nuance until it's too late. The show keeps returning to this tension. It keeps staging the moment where Marge almost leaves, almost chooses something else, and then doesn't. And the not leaving is the point. It's not failure. It's not defeat. It's the specific kind of love that chooses to stay even when staying is hard, and the show respects it, even when it's using it for jokes. Lisa wants to be understood. Not just listened to, understood. She has been the smartest person in every room she has ever been in for 36 years, and that intelligence has bought her almost nothing. It has made her lonely. It has made her the target of mockery from people who find intelligence threatening. It has given her a clarity about the world around her that functions more like a curse than a gift. Because she can see exactly what's wrong with Springfield, exactly what's wrong with her family, exactly what's wrong with America, and she can articulate it beautifully, and nobody cares. Bart wants to matter. Not in the Lisa way, not through achievement or recognition. He wants to matter in the way that a stone dropped into water matters, by making ripples, by disturbing something, by leaving a mark on the surface of the world that proves he was there. His pranks are love letters to the idea of consequence. Every time he does something that gets a reaction, he exists more fully. He is the most real when the world is responding to him, which is why he keeps pushing, keeps escalating, keeps throwing rocks at things to see what breaks. And Maggie. Maggie watches all of this. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has seen more of the human condition than most people do in a lifetime. And she says nothing. She watches. She waits. These 5 people are the engine of the show. Everything else, the satirical targets, the celebrity cameos, the elaborate set pieces, the dark implications we'll be exploring for the rest of this video, all of it exists to give these 5 people something to react to. The show is a machine for generating moments between them. The other stuff is beautiful dressing, but The Simpsons are the heart. Now, here's the thing about the surface level of The Simpsons that most casual viewers never quite register. The show, even at its most cartoonish, has always been profoundly sad underneath the jokes. This is not a new observation. Critics have been noting it since the early seasons. But it's worth sitting with for a moment, because the sadness is the foundation of everything we're going to discuss. The Simpsons is sad because it's honest. It's honest about what American life actually looks like when you pull back the curtain. The middle-class dream that Homer and Marge are living is the dream that was sold to their generation. A house, a family, a steady job, a community. And the show takes that dream seriously while also documenting all the ways it frays and disappoints and fails to deliver on its own promises. Homer has worked at the same job for 36 years. The same job. For a man who has in various episodes been a musician, an astronaut, a food critic, a professional boxer, a monorail conductor, a snowplow driver, a border guard, and literally hundreds of other things, he always returns to Sector 7G. To the same chair, to the same console, to the same job he fell into by accident at a company run by a man who doesn't know his name. There's something in that image that reaches past comedy into something quieter. The man who could have been anything, who has demonstrated in episode after episode that he is capable of adapting to almost any situation with surprising competence when he chooses to apply himself, who ended up in the most generic of all possible lives, and who stays there not because he has no other options, but because the life he has, imperfect and modest, and frequently embarrassing as it is his. It contains Marge, it contains the kids, it contains the couch and the television and Duff beer in the refrigerator. And those things, for Homer, are enough. More than enough. They're everything. That's the surface of The Simpsons. A town that looks like everywhere. A family that looks like yours, a little. A show that makes you laugh, and then, if you watch closely enough, makes you feel something much quieter and harder to name. Now, let's go deeper. Before we move further down the iceberg, let's talk about the show's relationship with time. Not the floating timeline theory, which we'll explore extensively in a later section. Just the basic, surface-level weirdness of a show that has been running for 36 years without any of its characters aging a single day. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show premiered. He was 10 years old in 1989, and he is 10 years old right now. He has experienced every cultural moment between those two dates. Every election, every disaster, every technological revolution, every shift in what it means to be a child in America, and he has processed all of them with the same 10-year-old brain he had on day one. The same is true for all of them. Homer has not aged. His body has absorbed 36 years of punishment that would kill a younger, healthier man, and he remains somewhere in his middle 30s, possibly his early 40s, with the same yellowed skin and the same stubble and the same 5 hairs that no amount of time has managed to multiply or diminish. Most people accept this without much thought. It's just how cartoons work, they say. The characters don't age because the show never ends, and if the characters aged, the show would eventually have to end. That's true as far as it goes, but there's something else happening here, something more interesting than production convenience. The frozen ages of the Simpsons family aren't just a technical choice. They're a philosophical one. They say something about what the show believes, or more precisely, what the audience needs the show to believe. Because here's the thing, every parent who watches The Simpsons and sees their own family reflected in it, even imperfectly, even satirically, is watching a version of parenthood that never has to end. The kids never leave. The house is never empty. The family never has to reckon with the silence that follows when children grow up and move on. For viewers who have already gone through that transition, The Simpsons offers a kind of sanctuary. Come back here. The kids are still small, the chaos is still manageable, the family is still together, always together, every Sunday night, forever. For viewers who haven't gone through it yet, who are still in the middle of it, the frozen ages are a gift of a different kind. Proof that it doesn't have to end. Proof that the loud, messy, beautiful insanity of raising a family can just keep going indefinitely without the clock running out. The Simpsons don't age because we don't want them to. We built the loop. We keep choosing to watch. Every Sunday night, we press play. Every Sunday night, the family settles onto the couch and the television glows, and Springfield is still there, exactly as we left it. That's the surface. That's what everyone knows. Now let's start going down. If you're still awake at this point, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I want to know where this video finds people. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There's a lot more of Springfield to explore, and you might want to be here for it. Section 2. The Yellow Skin Mystery. Why Springfield looks the way it does. There's a question that's been sitting in the background of The Simpsons for 36 years. Quiet and unremarked upon, so normalized. It's by repetition that most viewers have stopped registering it as a question at all. Why is everyone yellow? Not just the Simpson family, everyone. Moe the bartender is yellow. Principal Skinner is yellow. Chief Wiggum is yellow. Ned Flanders, despite presumably spending a great deal of time in the sunlight, tending his garden and attending outdoor church activities, is exactly the same shade of yellow as everyone else. The yellow is universal. The yellow is constant. The yellow has never been explained. And for most viewers, most of the time, it doesn't need to be explained. It's a stylistic choice. Groening has talked about it in interviews. The yellow skin was chosen because it would stand out on television sets in the late 80s and early 90s, which tended to wash out pale skin tones. Yellow was distinctive. Yellow would catch the eye. Yellow would make the characters immediately recognizable, even in a quick glance from across the room. That's the official explanation. It's a good one. It's probably true. But here's where the iceberg begins to reveal itself, because the official explanation and the in-universe reality are two very different things. And the in-universe reality is genuinely strange if you allow yourself to look at it directly. Within the world of the show, the characters are not depicted as being aware of their own skin color. Nobody in Springfield ever looks in a mirror and thinks, "My skin is yellow." Nobody has ever commented on the color in a way that suggested it was anything other than normal. To the residents of Springfield, the yellow skin is simply the color of human skin. It's baseline. It's default. It's what skin looks like. Until you introduce someone from outside Springfield, this is the detail that the theories always circle back to. When guest characters appear in Springfield, when celebrities visit the town, or when the family travels elsewhere and interacts with people from outside, those outsiders look different. Their proportions are more naturalistic. Their skin, while still stylized, is rendered in tones that are closer to what human skin actually looks like. Pink, taupe, brown, the full range. Normal. Only Springfield residents are yellow. The show has staged this contrast dozens of times without ever commenting on it. It presents it as a natural fact of the world it's depicting. Springfield people look like Springfield people. Outside people look like outside people. The camera never lingers on the difference. No character ever points at a visitor and says, "You look strange, your skin is a different color than ours." The difference is there. Visible, consistent across 36 years of episodes, and it is never acknowledged. There are a few explanations that the fan community has developed over the decades, and they range from the reassuringly mundane to the deeply unsettling. And it's worth moving through them slowly because each one adds something to the picture. The first and most benign explanation is the diet theory. Springfield as a community has remarkably bad eating habits. Homer's relationship with food is one of the show's central recurring jokes. But it's not just Homer. The entire town subsists largely on products from the Quick E-Mart, from Krusty Burger, from a range of processed and artificially colored food products that form the backbone of the Springfield diet. There is a real condition called carotenemia, in which excess consumption of foods containing beta-carotene, primarily orange and yellow vegetables, can cause the skin to take on a yellowish tint. It's harmless. It's reversible. It looks exactly like what you'd expect from a population eating processed food dyed with artificial yellow colorings. This is a charming explanation. It's the kind of explanation that satisfies people who want a rational answer without having to go anywhere darker. The Springfield residents are yellow because of what they eat. The end. Except it doesn't quite work because the explanation requires every single person in Springfield, from birth, to be consuming enough yellow-tinted food to produce a consistent skin discoloration, including infants, including people who presumably eat at least occasionally outside the local fast food ecosystem. including characters like Lisa, who is a vegetarian and a health-conscious child, and who is, nonetheless, exactly as yellow as her hot dog-eating brother. So the diet theory is pleasant but incomplete. The second explanation is the radiation theory, which we touched on in the introduction and which we'll return to throughout this video because it's the grand unified theory of Springfield, the one that explains the most things with the fewest assumptions. The Springfield nuclear power plant is real. It's active. It has, canonically within the show, 342 documented safety violations. It has been dumping radioactive waste into local waterways. It has cracked cooling towers patched with chewing gum. And it has been operating in this condition for decades, poisoning the water supply, the air, the soil of Springfield, and everything that grows in or on it. Radiation exposure at sustained levels does affect human physiology. In extreme cases and in certain types of radiation exposure, it can affect pigmentation. The Chernobyl disaster produced documented cases of unusual biological effects in the population living downwind of the plant for years afterward. The idea that a nuclear facility with the safety record of the Springfield plant, operating continuously for decades, could produce unusual physiological characteristics in the local population is not, strictly speaking, impossible. And here's the part that makes the radiation theory stick. It's not just the skin color, it's the entire physical profile. The four fingers, the pronounced overbites, the eyes that are too large and placed too low on the face, the hair that defies gravity, the body proportions that don't correspond to normal human anatomy. These are not just stylistic choices isolated to one character. They are universal characteristics of the Springfield-born population, characteristics that do not appear in people from outside the town. Look at it this way. When Michael Jackson appeared in The Simpsons, his character was rendered differently than the Springfield residents. When Dustin Hoffman appeared, differently. When the show has depicted characters visiting from other countries or other cities, they look like different kinds of people. The show's artists are not incapable of drawing normal human proportions. They do it all the time for outside characters. They choose not to do it for Springfield residents. And the question is, why? The most unsettling answer is the one the radiation theory provides. The artists draw Springfield residents differently because Springfield residents are different. Whatever has been seeping out of those cracked cooling towers for 40 years has done something to the biology of the people who live there, has changed the shape of their hands, has altered the structure of their skulls, has tinted their skin yellow, has produced physical characteristics in the population that are observable and distinct from the population outside the contamination zone. The show knows this. It has always known this. It introduced a three-eyed fish in Season 2 as a direct visual metaphor for what the plant is doing to living organisms. It has given us Homer's near superhuman ability to absorb injury and survive situations that should be fatal. It has given us Mr. Burns, who is so saturated with radiation that his body literally glows in the dark. These are not random character quirks. They are a coherent, consistent picture of a population living inside a slow biological catastrophe. But the yellow skin mystery goes deeper than just the radiation explanation, because there's a social dimension to it that the show has been quietly exploring for 36 years without ever stating explicitly. The yellow skin, within the world of the show, is normal. It's the default. It's what human beings are supposed to look like, at least according to the visual logic of Springfield. And when visitors arrive who don't share that characteristic, when people come from outside the yellow zone, they look slightly off to the audience even as the characters treat them as normal. There's a perceptual inversion happening. The audience knows that the visitors are more realistically rendered than the Springfield residents. But within the show's framing, the Springfield residents are the standard and the visitors are the aberration. This is subtle but important. The show is using color and proportion to tell you something about perspective. It's showing you a world from the inside, from the point of view of people who don't know they're different, who have no frame of reference for what they might have been if the circumstances of their birth had been different. Homer doesn't know his brain is damaged. He has no memory of what it felt like to think clearly, no comparison point. Bart doesn't know his attention span and impulse control are outside normal parameters. Lisa doesn't know that the level of intelligence she's carrying, while genuinely extraordinary, might have been even more extraordinary without 36 years of ambient radioactive exposure. They don't know what they've lost because the loss happened before they were old enough to know they had it. And that is perhaps the most unsettling thing about the yellow skin. Not that it might be a symptom of environmental contamination, but that the people living with it have no idea that it is, for them, simply what the world is, simply what they are, simply normal. There's another angle on the yellow skin that gets less attention but deserves it. The question of who isn't yellow. Within the show's regular cast, there are a handful of characters whose skin color deviates from the Springfield yellow. Dr. Hibbert, the Simpson family's physician, is rendered in a darker brown that is clearly intended to depict a black man. Apu Nahasapima Petalon, before his departure from the show in later seasons following cultural criticism of the character's depiction, was rendered in a warmer skin tone. Several recurring characters from outside Springfield's main community are depicted with skin tones other than yellow. The pattern here is that the yellow skin is primarily a characteristic of the white working-class Springfield community. Characters from different ethnic backgrounds, characters who are depicted as being from different cultural communities within Springfield, are not yellow in the same way. There are two readings of this, and they sit in tension with each other. The first reading is a production one. The yellow skin was chosen specifically as a neutral skin tone that wouldn't be read as representing any particular racial group. Gruning and the early production team didn't want the show's cast to look white. The yellow was meant to be a kind of visual abstraction, a universal color that placed the characters outside racial categorization while still being visually distinct. Other characters were rendered in their actual skin tones because the production team wanted to represent their backgrounds accurately. This reading is supported by statements from the show's creators and is probably the most accurate account of the decision as it was originally made. The second reading is an in-universe one. If the yellow skin is a product of environmental contamination from the nuclear plant, then the pattern of who is and isn't yellow tells you something about who lives close enough to the plant to be affected. It tells you about class and proximity and who has had the resources to put distance between themselves and the source of contamination. This reading gets dark very quickly, which is probably why the show has never gone near it explicitly. But the pattern is there if you look for it. And in a show that has been, at its best, a sustained critique of American class structure and the way that class determines who bears the costs of industrial capitalism, the pattern is not accidental. Let's talk for a moment about the four fingers. Every character in The Simpsons has four fingers on each hand. 4 fingers and 1 thumb, a total of 5 digits per hand, rather than the human standard of 5 fingers and 1 thumb, 6 total. This is common in animation and has been since the earliest days of the medium. Mickey Mouse has 4 fingers. Bugs. Bunny has 4 fingers. The reason is practical. 4-fingered hands are easier and faster to animate. They read more clearly at smaller sizes. There are conventions so established in animation that most viewers don't register them at all. But within the in-universe logic of Springfield, and particularly within the framework of the radiation theory, 4-fingered hands are polydactyly in reverse. Instead of extra fingers, you have missing ones. And polydactyly, the presence of extra or missing digits, is a documented consequence of certain types of congenital mutation, including those associated with radiation exposure during fetal development. This is the kind of detail that the radiation theory points to and says, this is not an accident. This is the show using a standard animation convention as a piece of world building. The 4 fingers are funny because they're cartoony. They're also, within the show's internal logic, a population-wide anatomical deviation that could be explained by the same thing that explains the yellow skin and the bulging eyes and the strange hair. The show knows you won't think about this. It's counting on you not to think about it. The same way Springfield counts on its residents not to think about the plant on the edge of town. The same way the yellow skin is just the yellow skin and has always been the yellow skin and doesn't mean anything. The show leaves the evidence in plain sight, then buries it under the assumption that you'll look right past it. Let's go one level deeper with the yellow skin mystery, down to where it connects to something that might be the most quietly devastating implication of the whole thing. If the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the unusual proportions are all symptoms of environmental contamination, and if those symptoms have been present in Springfield since before Any of the current residents were born, then the question becomes, when did it start? When did Springfield first become a yellow town? The plant has been operating since before Homer started working there. Mr. Burns has been running it since before Homer's parents were adults. The contamination, if it's real, has been ongoing for multiple generations. Homer's father, Abe Simpson, is yellow. And Abe's stories about his own past, his World War II service, his long, strange life before settling in Springfield, those stories are told by a man who was already inside the contamination zone when they happened, at least some of them. Was Springfield always yellow? Was there a Springfield before the plant? A Springfield with normal-looking residents and clear water and five-fingered hands? Is there, somewhere in the show's vast accumulated continuity, evidence of a time when the town was different? When the people looked different? When the fish in the river had two eyes? The show doesn't answer this. It doesn't seem interested in the question. Springfield exists in a kind of eternal present, where the current state of things is simply the way things have always been, which is itself a symptom of the condition we're describing. A population whose memory and critical thinking have been compromised by decades of radiation exposure would be exactly the kind of population that couldn't ask the question of when things started being this way. Because asking when implies that things could have been different. And that implication, followed to its logical conclusion, leads straight to the cracked cooling towers and the man who won't fix them. The yellow skin is not just a symptom, it's a seal. It marks the residents as belonging to Springfield, as being shaped by it, as being part of the ongoing experiment whether they know it or not. Every time a baby is born in Springfield and emerges from the hospital, yellow, the experiment continues. Every new generation joins the population of people who don't know they're different. Every new set of four-fingered hands and wide eyes and strange hair is another data point in a study that has been running for decades without any of its subjects consenting to participate. And Burns, who has the best medical care of anyone in Springfield, who has his own private physicians and his own pharmaceutical division and his own weekly radiation treatments calibrated to keep him alive and functional, Burns is the only person in town who fully understands what the data means. He's reading the results every single day. He just never tells anyone what they say. Section 3. Homer's Lost Decades. The full timeline of a broken man. To understand Homer Simpson, you have to understand something that the show has been carefully building for 36 seasons, while keeping it just below the threshold of explicit acknowledgement. Homer Simpson did not become the man he is by accident. He was made. He was shaped and damaged and redirected by a series of forces, some of them random, some of them deliberately applied, into the specific form he now occupies. Large, loving, slow, dependent, unable to imagine anything better than what he has. This is not a sad story in the way that most sad stories are told. There is no villain speech. There is no moment where Homer stands at a crossroads and makes the wrong choice. The damage happened incrementally, slowly, the way all the most thorough damage does over years and decades, in increments too small to register as anything other than the ordinary texture of a difficult life. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but the beginning of Homer. The person he was before the show started, before Marge, before the plant, before Springfield had fully worked its way into the structure of his bones. Homer's childhood, as depicted across dozens of flashback episodes scattered throughout the show's run, is a picture of managed absence. His mother, Mona, left when he was young. The circumstances of her departure are complicated, and we'll explore them in detail in a later section. But the fact of the departure is simple and devastating. The most important adult in a young child's life was gone, and the explanation he was given for her absence, that she was dead, was a lie. Abe Simpson raised Homer alone after Mona's departure, and Abe's parenting style, to put it charitably, was emotionally inexpressive to a degree that bordered on negligence. Not cruel, not abusive in any direct way, just absent in the way that people who don't know how to give what they never received tend to be absent. Abe had his own damage, his own losses, his own reasons for the distance he maintained, but Homer was the one who grew up inside that distance and had to build a self out of whatever materials it left him. The character that emerged from that building project was, by design or by accident, extraordinarily susceptible to approval. Homer needs to be liked. He needs it the way some people need caffeine or sunlight. It's not vanity, it's something closer to a survival mechanism. The child who grew up without a mother and with a father who couldn't show love learned to read every social interaction for signs of acceptance or rejection, and to prioritize acceptance above almost everything else because rejection was the thing he had already lost the most important people in his life to. This explains a remarkable number of Homer's behaviors that the show plays for comedy, but that sit differently under a biographical lens. His inability to stand up to Mr. Burns, his desperate need to be popular at the plant, his compulsive attempts to fit in with social groups that don't particularly want him, his terror when Marge is unhappy with him, a terror that is out of proportion to whatever minor domestic failure has triggered it. Because for Homer, unhappiness in the person he loves maps directly onto the oldest fear he carries, the fear that she will leave, that everyone eventually leaves, that he is fundamentally the kind of person who drives love away. These are not cartoon character traits. They are the psychological fingerprints of a specific kind of childhood wound. The show has enough compassion for Homer to have encoded that wound into him, and enough respect for the audience to trust that some of them will notice it's there. The crayon in Homer's brain deserves its own extended examination because it's one of the most audacious things the show has ever done, and the full weight of it tends to get lost in the comedy of its presentation. In the season 12 episode, Homer versus Patty and Selma, the series reveals that Homer, as a child, somehow lodged a crayon inside his nasal cavity. The crayon traveled over time to a position inside his brain, where it has been since childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function. An X-ray shows it clearly. The crayon is there. It's real. And when Homer has it removed, the results are immediate and striking. His IQ, which the show's creator has placed at 55, a number consistent with significant cognitive impairment, jumps dramatically. Homer becomes, without the crayon, a genuinely intelligent person. He's articulate. He's perceptive. He understands things. He can analyze situations, predict consequences, make connections between pieces of information that the crayon-impaired version of him would never have been able to make. He is, functionally, a different person, and it makes him miserable. Not because intelligence is bad, because Springfield is bad. Because the world that Homer sees clearly, without the crayon, is a world that is deeply disappointing. He can see how his job is a waste of his potential. He can see how the town he lives in is mediocre and stagnant. He can see the machinery of the system he's trapped in, the way Burns exploits him, the way the community functions on the collective suppression of difficult truths, the way his own family, whom he loves desperately, is shaped by limitations that nobody has ever bothered to try to change. He can see all of it, and seeing it doesn't give him the power to change it. It just gives him the pain of knowing. So Homer has the crayon put back in. He chooses to stop seeing clearly. He chooses the fog because the fog is bearable and the clarity is not. This is played for laughs. The audience laughs. And underneath the laughter is something genuinely tragic about the nature of consciousness and choice, and what it means to be a person in circumstances that are beyond your power to change. Sometimes the fog isn't just a coping mechanism. Sometimes it's the only rational response to a clarity that offers nothing but suffering. But here's the question the show glosses over and never comes back to. How did a crayon get lodged in a child's brain? Children do put things in their noses. That's real, and it happens, and it's usually caught quickly because children in pain cry and get taken to doctors who remove the offending object. For a crayon to travel from a child's nose to a position in the frontal lobe without detection requires either that no one noticed Homer was in pain, or that the medical establishment responsible for Homer's care noticed and chose not to address it. The first possibility is a picture of profound parental neglect. Abe Simpson, already established as emotionally distant and frequently absent, simply didn't notice that his son had a foreign object in his skull. Homer cried or didn't cry and nobody paid attention, and the crayon sat there through childhood and adolescence and adulthood, slowly pressing on whatever part of Homer's brain it was touching, slowly degrading his ability to think, slowly making him more and more into the specific shape of person that his circumstances required him to be. The second possibility is darker and connects directly to the Burns conspiracy that we'll explore in a later section. If the doctors in Springfield knew about the crown and chose not to remove it, the question becomes why? Who benefits from Homer being cognitively impaired? Who needs the safety inspector at the nuclear power plant to be someone who sleeps at his console and throws donuts into the reactor? Who, in other words, benefits most from Homer's stupidity? The show doesn't ask this question out loud. It gives you all the pieces and then trusts you to sit with what they add up to while everyone laughs at the X-ray. Let's talk about Homer's employment record, because it is one of the most extraordinary documents in the history of fictional workers, and it deserves more attention than it typically gets. Homer Simpson has held hundreds of jobs during the show's run. Hundreds. He has been a musician, a food critic, a professional wrestler, a country music star, an astronaut, a carny, a monorail conductor, a bodyguard, a missionary, a mayor's aide, a restaurant owner, a secret agent, a mob enforcer, a gun dealer, a personal trainer, a news anchor, a baseball team owner, a college student, a soldier, a snowplow operator, a church worker, a life coach, a nuclear technician, and at least once, a garbage commissioner. In each of these roles, Homer has displayed a natural aptitude that borders on the uncanny. He is genuinely good at things when he applies himself. The joke is that he never applies himself consistently, that the plant calls him back each time, or the adventure ends, or the opportunity fades. But what's less often noted is how consistently competent Homer is at the height of each of these ventures. When he's a food critic, he's a good food critic. When he's a bodyguard, he's a good bodyguard. The capacity is there. It surfaces briefly and brilliantly, and then recedes. What this tells you about Homer is that the version of him we see most of the time, the slow, fumbling, disaster-prone Homer of Sector 7G, is not his ceiling. It's not even close to his ceiling. His ceiling is visible in glimpses, in episodes where the show lets him be what he could be for 30 minutes before returning him to the couch. He is capable of remarkable things. He is kept from those things by a combination of circumstances, habits, and possibly a small yellow crayon that conspire to keep him exactly where he is. The 742 documented errors at the plant. The show mentions this number once and moves past it. 742 separate incidents in which Homer's performance at work resulted in a documentable failure. Most people would have been fired after one. Most workplaces would have mandatory termination policies triggered by the 10th. Homer has had 742 and remains employed. The official explanation is that Mr. Burns keeps Homer employed because he's too incompetent to notice how incompetent Homer is. But the show itself contradicts this in the episode where German investors briefly purchase the plant. They fire Homer immediately. They evaluate the cost of bringing the plant up to code and nearly go bankrupt from the estimate. Burns buys the plant back. Burns rehires Homer. Burns, who cannot remember Homer's name despite decades of employment, who treats Homer as an interchangeable unit of labor, keeps Homer specifically and deliberately employed because Homer's presence at that console, incompetent and unquestioning, is a feature of the plant's operation rather than a bug. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within a week. Homer keeps it running exactly as it is. This is not negligence. This is strategy. There are a handful of episodes that function as windows into what Homer's life could have looked like under different circumstances, and they are some of the most quietly devastating things the show has ever aired. The first is the Season 4 episode Lisa's First Word, in which the show flashes back to 1984 and the birth of Lisa. Young Homer and young Marge are buying their first house on Evergreen Terrace. They're broke. They're scrambling. Homer is trying to build a crib for the expected baby and failing badly at it. And throughout all of this, there's something about young Homer that's different from the Homer we usually see. He's eager. He's enthusiastic. He's trying very hard at things he's bad at because he wants to get them right for his family. He has not yet settled into the comfortable resignation of middle-aged Homer. He still believes that trying hard enough can overcome the gap between what he is and what he wants to be. It's an extraordinarily sweet episode, and the sweetness of it is inseparable from the sadness, because the audience knows where this Homer ends up. Knows that the eagerness will smooth out into complacency. Knows that the trying will gradually give way to the accepting. Not through any single catastrophic failure, but through the slow, accumulated weight of a life that doesn't quite deliver on its promises. The second window is the season 8 episode You Only Move Twice, in which Homer gets a new job at an organization that turns out to be a supervillain operation run by the spectacularly competent Hank Scorpio. Scorpio is everything Homer's actual boss isn't. He values Homer. He supports him. He listens to him. He promotes him and gives him real responsibility and treats him like a person whose contributions matter. Homer is, briefly, thriving. He's good at his job. He's happy. He's the person he could be in an environment that actually supports him rather than exploits him. And then he goes back to Burns, back to Springfield, back to the plant and the couch and the life that's too small for him. Because Marge is unhappy in the new town. Because the kids are having problems adjusting. Because the family, which is Homer's real job, needs something that the better life can't provide them with. And Homer chooses the family over the better life every time, without hesitation. Because that's who Homer is, underneath the dysfunction and the incompetence and the 742 errors. The man who chooses his family over everything, every time, even when the choice costs him something real. Homer's relationship with Marge is one of the show's great sustained mysteries, because it shouldn't work, and it does. Not just narratively, it works emotionally in a way that holds up across 36 seasons of pressure testing. They are not well matched. This is visible. Marge is organized, emotionally intelligent, socially perceptive, long-suffering in a way that requires genuine fortitude. Homer is chaotic, emotionally blunt, socially oblivious, energetically committed to taking the path of least resistance in almost every situation. In a realistic drama, this marriage would have collapsed in the first decade. In a more sophisticated comedy, the show would have used the mismatch for more cynical ends. Instead, The Simpsons keeps insisting that these two people love each other. Actually love each other, not in the default way that sitcom characters love each other, but in a specific and particular way that has been earned and developed over years of difficult episodes and genuine moments of grace. The reason it works is buried in both of their histories. Marge comes from a family where love was conditional and performance was required. Her father was distant. Her mother was critical. Approval was available but scarce. Homer, for all his chaos and obliviousness, loves Marge without condition. He finds her beautiful in ways that she can't quite believe. He never requires her to perform anything. He accepts her completely, in the clumsy, total way that only people who have never had enough love in their lives know how to give it when they finally find it. And Marge loves Homer because, underneath the chaos, she can see what the show spends most of its time obscuring. She can see what Homer actually is, not the Homer who causes incidents at the plant, or destroys the kitchen, or sleeps through important events. The Homer who shows up when it matters, who is when the stakes are real and someone he loves needs him. Surprisingly and consistently there. Who would walk through fire for his family? Who does, regularly, in a show that enjoys its metaphors being literal. She loves the Homer that exists in the moments when he has to be more than what he usually is. And those moments, scattered through 788 episodes, are enough. They always have been. There's a version of Homer's story that the show has been building the pieces of for years without ever fully assembling them into one place, and it goes like this. A boy is born into a working-class family in a contaminated industrial town. His mother is forced to flee by a vindictive billionaire when he is very young. His father raises him with the tools available to him, which are limited. The boy grows up without the emotional infrastructure that a complete family might have provided. He develops the psychology of an abandoned child, the desperate need for approval, the terror of rejection, the willingness to endure almost anything rather than risk being left again. At some point in childhood, probably during one of the unremarked episodes of difficulty that the show has scattered across its flashback episodes, the boy puts something in his nose and nobody notices, and the something travels somewhere it shouldn't go. And the boy gets a little bit slower, a little bit foggier, a little bit less capable of seeing the full picture of his own situation. He grows up. He meets a girl with a tower of blue hair and a voice like patience itself. He gets her pregnant. He marries her. He gets a job at the local power plant, the one that's been poisoning his hometown since before he was born, the one owned by the man who drove his mother away. He settles into a house on a quiet street. He has 3 children. He watches television. He eats donuts. He falls asleep on the couch. And somewhere in there, somewhere in the gap between the boy who was capable of more and the man who settled for less, something was lost. Not through his own failure, exactly. Not through any single definable catastrophe, but through the accumulation of forces that were always working against him. Some of them environmental, some of them deliberate, all of them powerful, none of them his fault, all of them his inheritance. That's Homer's story. That's the story the show has been telling for 36 years. Behind the donuts and the Duff beer and the strangling of Bart and the spectacular incompetence. A man who was broken before he was old enough to choose anything. Who has spent his whole life building something beautiful inside the wreckage. A family that loves him. A home that holds them. A life that is smaller than he could have had, but larger than he deserved given what he had to work with. That's Homer Simpson. That's the full picture. And now let's keep going. Section 4. The Secret Lives of Minor Characters. Springfield's Hidden Depths. One of the things that separates The Simpsons from almost every other animated series ever made is the depth of its supporting cast. Not just the number of recurring characters, though the number is extraordinary. The depth, the layering, the way that characters who might appear in a dozen episodes over 36 seasons have nevertheless been given enough detail, enough backstory, enough internal contradiction to feel like real people with real histories that exist off-screen. Springfield is not just a backdrop, it's a community, and communities have a texture that comes from the accumulated stories of everyone in them, not just the ones the camera follows. The Simpsons has been building that texture since the beginning, adding details to minor characters across hundreds of episodes in ways that reward attention and punish casual viewing. Because the casual viewer sees a collection of funny background characters, and the attentive viewer sees something much stranger and more complete. Let's start with some of the ones who deserve more examination than they usually get. Moe Schislak is presented primarily as a joke. The grimy, misanthropic bartender with the vaguely threatening phone manner and the face that, by the show's own acknowledgement, causes visible discomfort in people who look at it directly. He's Homer's closest friend outside the family. He's the keeper of the space where Homer goes to not be a father or a husband for a while. He's the man who will always let Homer run a tab. But Moe's backstory, assembled from details scattered across dozens of episodes, is one of the most unexpectedly rich in the show. He was, in his youth, a child actor. He played a character called Moe on a sketch comedy show aimed at children, a sweet-faced, wide-eyed kid whose appeal was immediate and total, and then, as these things always are, temporary. The show ended. The audience moved on. Moe aged, and the face that had been charming at 10 became the face he carries now. And the gap between the person that face once belonged to and the person it belongs to now is the engine of his melancholy. He has tried repeatedly to find happiness. He has fallen in love multiple times with women who leave him. He has attempted to kill himself in ways the show treats as comedic, but that take on a different weight when you consider how many times it's happened and how consistent the pattern is. He has invented a cocktail, a mysterious purple drink that became briefly fashionable in Springfield, that he created while trying to develop something that would make people want to come to his bar, want to be near him, want to stay. Moe is a portrait of loneliness so thorough that it has become structural. The loneliness isn't something that happened to him, it's what he's made of. He was charming once, briefly, in a way he didn't choose and couldn't maintain, and everything since then has been an attempt to get back to some version of being wanted. To replicate the experience of being seen by an audience that had, temporarily, chosen him. The bar is his audience. Homer and the regulars are the crowd that stayed after the lights went up. They are, by sheer, in whatever reduced way, the approximation of what he lost. Apu Nahasapi Mapatilan ran the Quick E-Mart for 25 seasons before the show quietly reduced his appearances in the wake of public criticism about the character's depiction as a stereotype. His exit from the show's regular rotation was never addressed on screen, which created an interesting situation where a character who had been central to Springfield's community for decades simply faded out without explanation. What's often forgotten in the cultural conversation about Apu is how unusual his backstory was by the standards of a primetime animated comedy in the 90s. He had a doctorate in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology. He moved to America and took the quick E-Mart job as a temporary position while pursuing other opportunities. The other opportunities never came. The temporary position became his life. He became the most educated convenience store operator in Springfield, possibly in America, running a shop that keeps being robbed and occasionally exploded while harboring the memory of the person he intended to be and the life he intended to live. His wedding, arranged by his parents according to tradition and initially rejected by him in favor of Western ideas of romantic love, became one of the show's most unexpectedly moving stories. The woman his parents chose, Manjula, turned out to be someone he fell genuinely in love with. The tradition he resisted delivered what the individualism he'd embraced could not. His 8 children, celebrated by the show as a kind of joke about chaos, were also, implicitly, evidence of a man who had found more than he'd hoped for in the life he'd accidentally chosen. The Quick E-Mart is one of the few businesses in Springfield that hasn't changed dramatically over the show's run. In a town where everything resets and changes and contradicts itself, Apu's store has been a constant. The squishies are always there, the expired meat is always available if you know to ask. The lottery tickets are always by the register. In a Springfield that can't decide what state it's in or what decade it's living in, the Quick E-Mart is one of the few things that just is what it is. That consistency is Apu's gift to the town. In a community of resets and reinventions, he was just there. Reliably, warmly, irritatingly. Always there. Chief Clancy Wiggum is the avatar of American law enforcement's relationship with competence. Not corrupt in a malicious way, not brutal, not venal in any particularly grand sense. Just incompetent to a degree that functions as its own kind of injustice, because a police force that can't solve crimes or protect citizens is failing the community just as completely as one that's actively working against it, just more quietly, without anyone to direct the anger at. But Wiggum's incompetence has layers. He genuinely wants to be a good police officer. He has, in certain episodes, demonstrated actual perceptiveness and genuine commitment to justice when the situation requires it. The incompetence isn't laziness exactly. It's a systemic problem. Wiggum is the product of a Springfield that doesn't prioritize good policing, because good policing would require asking hard questions about who has the power in town and how they maintain it. A truly competent chief of police in Springfield would have spent years investigating the nuclear plant, would have asked questions about the skeletons in the basement, would have pursued the investigation of who actually shot Mr. Burns with the rigor the evidence deserved. Instead, Springfield has Wiggum, who once arrested himself by mistake, who keeps a jelly donut where the bullets should be in his holster, who is, in his way, exactly the kind of police chief that a town like Springfield deserves, which is to say the kind that keeps the peace by not looking too hard at anything that would disturb it. His relationship with his son Ralph is perhaps the show's most unexpected source of genuine warmth. Ralph Wiggum, the boy who famously declared that he choo-choo chooses you and sent a Valentine's card with a train on it, who regularly says things that should be grammatically impossible and somehow make emotional sense, is treated by the show and by his father with a tenderness that is entirely free of the cynicism that colors most of Springfield's relationships. Wiggum loves Ralph in a way that is uncomplicated and complete. He is not a good cop. He is not a particularly effective parent in any measurable sense. But he loves his son with the whole of himself, without reservation. And Ralph, who exists in a relationship to language and logic that nobody has ever managed to fully map, loves him back. In a show full of damaged parent-child relationships, the Wiggums are an anomaly. An argument that sometimes the simplest love is the most durable, that you don't have to be competent to be devoted, that showing up, even badly, even confusedly, with your uniform buttoned wrong and your weapon misplaced, is sometimes enough. Principal Seymour Skinner, or as we know he is actually named, Armin Tamzarian, is one of the most complex figures in Springfield for reasons that have nothing to do with the controversial episode that revealed his true identity. The real Skinner, whoever he is under the name he's borrowed, is a man caught between a sense of duty and his terror of being exposed. He runs Springfield Elementary with the desperate dedication of someone who knows his authority is contingent on nobody looking too hard at the paperwork. He is in a constant low-level war with Superintendent Chalmers, who suspects but cannot prove that Skinner is not everything he presents himself to be. He maintains a relationship with his mother Agnes that is so psychologically loaded that the show has mined it for comedy for 3 decades without exhausting its implications. Agnes Skinner is one of the great minor villains of Springfield, operating at a scale that is tiny and domestic and therefore somehow more unsettling than Burns's industrial malevolence. She controls Skinner through a mixture of dependency, guilt, and the casual cruelty that certain kinds of love permit when it's never been examined. Skinner, for his part, has arranged his entire adult life around maintaining her approval, has never married, has never fully separated himself from her household, has sacrificed whatever broader life he might have had on the altar of being, in some fundamental way hers. Whether this Skinner is the real Skinner or the borrowed one, the psychology works either way. A man who took on another man's identity did so because he needed to be claimed by someone. Agnes claiming him, even with all her sharpness and her demands and her disappointment, was a form of belonging that Tamzarian had never had. And the life he built inside that borrowed name, flawed and constrained as it is still more of a life than the one he was living before he walked through Agnes's door. Ned Flanders. We'll return to Ned extensively in a later section, because the darkness underneath his cheerfulness deserves its own space. But for now, as part of the gallery of Springfield's minor character depths, let's note one thing about Ned that rarely gets mentioned. Ned is the only person in Springfield who has been consistently and actively kind to everyone around him. Not occasionally kind, not situationally kind, consistently, effortfully, sometimes grindingly kind, even to people who don't deserve it, even to Homer, who has cost him more than most people lose in a lifetime. This is treated primarily as a character quirk and secondarily as a punchline, because of course it's funny when someone is relentlessly, impossibly nice in a world that keeps punishing niceness. But there's something worth sitting with in the fact that the show has maintained Ned's kindness for 36 years, as consistently as it has maintained Homer's incompetence. These are the twin poles of Springfield's moral universe. At one end, a man who tries his best and gets punished for it. At the other, a man who rarely tries and gets away with almost everything. The show never resolves this tension. It can't. Resolving it would require the universe of Springfield to be fair, and Springfield's universe is not fair. Springfield's universe is a specific, accurate, quietly brutal depiction of how unfairness functions in real communities. The people who work hardest for the least reward. The people who coast on the accumulated advantages of birth and circumstances. The endless, grinding gap between those two groups that no amount of niceness or hard work or prayer has ever managed to close. Otto Mann, the school bus driver, deserves a moment of examination because he is one of the show's most unexplored characters despite appearing in hundreds of episodes. Otto is, by the evidence available, a highly intelligent person whose intelligence has been entirely directed toward the experience of living rather than the accumulation of anything conventional society measures. He failed his driving test multiple times, not through incapacity, but through a philosophical disagreement with the test's premises. He plays guitar with genuine skill. He is thoughtful about music in a way that suggests real depth of engagement. He is kind to the children he drives, genuinely, not performatively. He lives in apparent poverty, often without permanent housing, serene in circumstances that would be desperate for most people. He has an equanimity about material conditions that is either a function of genuine philosophical development or a function of medication, and the show declines to clearly specify which, possibly because the line between those two things is more porous than conventional wisdom suggests. Otto is what happens when someone has all the capacity for a conventional life and simply decides not to build one. Not out of laziness or failure, but out of a considered, continuous decision that the conventional life isn't worth the trade. He has chosen to optimize for a different set of values, for experience and sensation and connection over stability and accumulation, and the performance of respectability. Springfield looks at him and sees a failure. He looks at Springfield and sees something like a warning. There are dozens of characters in Springfield who never get enough time for their depth to be fully visible, but who the show has been quietly layering for decades. Sideshow Bob, the opera-singing former second banana turned murderous obsessive, whose relationship with Bart is one of the most structurally strange things in the show, is something we'll return to. Krusty the Clown, whose Judaism and his father's disappointment form a backstory that is alternately comedic and genuinely heartbreaking. Disco Stew, who exists primarily as a joke about a man trapped in the wrong decade, but who, in the handful of moments when the show lets him breathe, reveals an unexpected earnestness about his identity and his choices. The depths of Springfield are genuinely bottomless. Every character you look at long enough starts to give you something back. Every resident of this impossible town has been built with enough detail to suggest a complete inner life that exists beyond the edges of what the camera shows. This is the miracle of The Simpsons, the thing that separates it from every other long-running animated series. It's not just a cartoon, it's a community. And communities have a thickness to them, a texture, a weight of accumulated human history that can't be faked and can't be manufactured. It has to be built over years through sustained attention and genuine care for the lives of the people being depicted. The show has been building Springfield for 36 years. And Springfield, every corner of it, every dark alley and bright diner and school classroom and factory floor, has become real in a way that fiction rarely manages. That's the gift of the minor characters. They are the proof that Springfield is a place, not just a set. Section 5. The God Tier. Religion, fate, and the supernatural in Springfield. The Simpsons has a stranger relationship with God than almost any other mainstream American television show, and it's worth taking some time with that strangeness because it illuminates something important about the show's moral architecture. God exists in the Simpsons universe. This is not ambiguous. God appears in the show. God has a face, a voice, a body, and a personality. God has opinions about Springfield and its residents. God has spoken to Homer on more than one occasion. In the Season 4 episode Homer the Heretic, Homer decides to stop going to church and instead spends his Sunday morning doing exactly what he wants: cooking food in his underwear, watching television, and generally enjoying the experience of being alone in his house. The episode ends with Homer having an actual conversation with God, who appears in a dream, who has a face and answers questions, and who, crucially, tells Homer that while he shouldn't abandon organized religion entirely, he thinks Homer's personal faith, expressed in his own way, is valid. God tells Homer he is forgiven. God is kind about it. This is remarkable in several ways. The Simpsons is a primetime network comedy. The audience for primetime network comedy includes people across the entire spectrum of American religious belief and practice. Depicting God as a character who appears and speaks and has opinions is risky territory for a show trying to maintain broad appeal. The show does it anyway, and does it with surprising thoughtfulness, because the God of The Simpsons is not the God of any particular denomination. He's the God of a show that is genuinely curious about what it would mean if God existed and was paying attention to something as specific and ordinary as the Simpson family. And the God of The Simpsons pays attention to Homer. Specifically, repeatedly, in ways that no other character in the show receives. Homer has met God twice. Homer has had his prayers answered on at least 3 documented occasions. Homer has been the subject of divine intervention at critical moments, small interventions, things that could be explained by coincidence, but the show frames them in a way that suggests intention. Why Homer? The theological architecture of The Simpsons is stranger and more coherent than it first appears, and it centers on a question the show keeps approaching without quite landing on an answer. If God exists in Springfield and God speaks to Homer, why does God appear to ignore Ned Flanders? Ned is the most observant believer in Springfield. He attends church faithfully. He reads scripture. He prays. He tries, with genuine effort and genuine cost to himself, to live according to religious principles. He has sacrificed pleasure, ease, and ordinary human self-interest in the service of his faith. He has forgiven people who didn't deserve forgiveness, loved people who didn't deserve love, turned the other cheek when turning the other cheek cost him something real. And the God who talks to Homer in dreams has never once appeared to Ned. The divine conversations happen with the man who doesn't go to church. The miracles cluster around the man who routinely violates every principle his neighbor holds sacred. The universe of Springfield has arranged things so that faithfulness goes unrewarded and faithlessness goes unpunished, and this arrangement has been maintained for 36 seasons without explanation. There are several ways to read this. The cynical reading is that the show is using the God question to satirize religious hypocrisy, the gap between stated belief and actual behavior, the tendency of organized religion to promise rewards that the universe fails to deliver. This reading is probably partly true. The show has always been interested in the gap between what America says it values and what it actually values. The more interesting reading is that the show is depicting a God who has specific affections, who pays attention not to the people who perform virtue most conspicuously, but to the people who are most genuinely human in their failures. Homer is not a good man in any conventional religious sense. He is frequently selfish, often lazy, persistently oblivious to the suffering of people around him. But he loves his family with a completeness that very few people, religious or otherwise, manage to sustain. He is, in the most fundamental sense, present. Present to the people who need him. Present in a way that transcends competence or morality or any of the other metrics by which the world typically measures goodness. And God, the God of The Simpsons, seems to find Homer more interesting than Ned. Seems to find Homer more worthy of conversation, more worthy of the small interventions that the show occasionally allows. Not because Homer is better, because Homer is more fully, messily, irreducibly alive. The show is not making a theological argument. It's making a humanistic one. That God, if God exists, would probably be more interested in the people who are trying to figure out how to live than in the people who have already decided they know the answer. Religion in Springfield takes many forms beyond the Flanders variety. The show has given Homer membership in a staggering variety of religious and quasi-religious organizations over the years. He has joined a Stonecutters Lodge, a secret society that turns out to control much of what happens in the Western world. He has been briefly involved with a cult. He has, in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, interacted with the supernatural in ways that blur the line between horror and religious experience. He has been to heaven. He has been to hell. He has had his soul sold and bought back. He has encountered creatures and entities that operate outside the normal laws of the Springfield universe in ways that suggest the supernatural is real there consistently, not just in the Halloween specials. The Springfield universe has a genuine supernatural layer. Ghosts exist. Magic works under certain conditions. The fate of souls is a real mechanical question with real answers. In the episode, Bart sells his soul. The show treats the soul as a physical object that can be bought, sold, and recovered. When Bart sells his soul for $5 and subsequently loses the ability to experience joy, warmth, or connection with others, the show is making an argument about what souls actually are, not metaphysical abstractions, functional components of human experience. The thing that allows feeling, the thing that creates the capacity for love. When Bart gets his soul back through Lisa's intercession, through an act of genuine loving sacrifice on her part, he is restored to himself. The joy returns. The warmth returns. The connection with others returns. The show is being literal about the soul while also being poetic about what it means. This is typical of the show's approach to the supernatural. It takes the mechanisms seriously. It follows the implications of its premises. If souls are real and can be sold, then the act of selling one has real consequences that work according to consistent rules. If God exists and speaks to people in dreams, then those conversations have meaning that goes beyond mere symbolism. Springfield is a town where the supernatural is real. It's just not particularly impressive about it. The ghosts are mostly harmless. The magic usually backfires. God is available for conversation, but not particularly directive. The universe of Springfield is supernatural in the way that everyday life sometimes feels supernatural. Not in grand, apocalyptic ways. In small, strange, liminal ways, the ways that make you stop and wonder if there's more going on than you can see. There is an episode that doesn't get talked about enough in the context of Springfield's religious architecture. Season 6's Bart's Dog Gets an F, which is actually about training Santa's Little Helper, contains a throwaway moment that has stuck with attentive viewers for decades. Homer, in a moment of genuine desperation, prays. Not performatively, not as a joke, but genuinely. He kneels. He speaks to God directly without the elaborate ritual Ned employs, without theological framing, just a man asking for help with something that matters to him. And his prayer is answered. Not dramatically, not with angels or lightning or a voice from a cloud, with the specific outcome he asked for, delivered through what could be called coincidence, but what the show frames, just slightly, as something else. These moments are scattered throughout the show's run. Small prayers answered quietly. Small interventions that don't announce themselves as miracles, but that have the quality of care about them. The universe of Springfield is not random. Something is paying attention to the people there. Something responds, occasionally and without guarantees, to genuine need expressed in genuine vulnerability. The show never makes this explicit. It never commits to the theological conclusion. But the pattern is there for 36 years, consistent and quiet, like a hand you can't quite see, occasionally, briefly, keeping someone from falling. Let's talk about fate and The Simpsons, because the show has an unusual relationship with the concept of characters being destined for particular outcomes. The flash-forward episodes, of which there are several across the show's run, consistently depict a future for the characters that is recognizable. Lisa becomes a successful adult woman in a difficult professional and personal world. Bart becomes either a failure or a late bloomer, depending on the episode, but always someone whose relationship with consequence has finally caught up to him. Maggie, in the few glimpses of her future, is always doing something remarkable. These futures are not presented as certainties. The show takes care to frame them as possibilities, as glimpsed trajectories rather than fixed destinations. But the consistency across different flash-forward episodes, the fact that the broad strokes of these futures tend to rhyme even when the specific details differ, suggests that the show has an idea of where these characters are going, which raises a question about the floating timeline. If the futures are visible, if the trajectories are legible, then the permanent present of Springfield is not a fact of the universe. It's a choice. A stasis that has been imposed on a narrative that knows where it's going and has decided not to go there yet. Fate in the Simpsons universe is real but deferrable. The characters have destinies. They're just not allowed to live them. Not because of anything external, not because of the radiation or the coma or the collective denial. Because the show has decided that the journey is more valuable than the destination. That the process of becoming is more interesting than the state of having become. That every episode that keeps Bart at 10 and Lisa at 8 is another episode in which the story can still happen, in which everything is still possible, in which the ending has not yet been reached. There is something almost devotional about that choice. Something that resembles, without quite being, faith. The faith that the story deserves to continue. That the family deserves more time. That whatever waits at the end of Springfield's floating timeline, it should wait a little longer. Section 6. The Children of Springfield. Bart, Lisa, and what they were never allowed to become. There's a particular kind of tragedy reserved for gifted children in difficult circumstances. It's quieter than the loud tragedies of poverty and violence. Quieter and in some ways more insidious because it's easy to miss. Easy to mistake for the ordinary disappointments of growing up. Easy to frame as the child's failure rather than the system's. The Simpsons has been exploring this kind of tragedy through its two older children for 36 seasons, and the fact that it does so primarily through comedy hasn't made it any less true. Let's start with Lisa, because Lisa's situation is in many ways the more visible of the two. She is brilliant in a town that doesn't value intelligence. She is principled in a community that operates on compromise and denial. She is earnest in a culture that rewards cynicism. Every quality that makes her extraordinary in potential is a quality that makes her ordinary life harder. The show has been honest about this from the beginning. Lisa's intelligence has never been a solution to her problems. It has consistently been a source of them. She can see what's wrong with everything around her, which means she can't participate in the comfortable blindness that makes Springfield livable for most of its residents. She knows the nuclear plant is dangerous. She knows the politicians are corrupt. She knows the school curriculum is inadequate. She knows her father is cognitively impaired. She knows at some level she can't quite articulate even to herself that the town she's growing up in is not a healthy place. And she can't do anything about it. She's 8 years old. She has no power. She can play saxophone beautifully and argue persuasively and identify logical fallacies in adults' reasoning and write reports that would stand up in an academic context, and none of it translates into the ability to change the things that hurt her. Lisa's defining emotional condition is isolation, not loneliness exactly. Loneliness is the state of wanting connection and not having it. Lisa's isolation is the state of having connection, having family and friends and community, but experiencing all of them through a glass wall of intelligence that prevents full contact. She is always slightly outside the warmth of things, always seeing the structure of the moment while everyone else is living inside it, always the observer, never quite the participant. The show has compassion for this. It never pretends Lisa's situation is fine. It keeps staging her disappointments, her attempts to connect that fall slightly short, her moments of genuine warmth that are real and good but not quite enough. It keeps building the picture of a child who deserves more than what Springfield can offer her. And then it keeps her there. At 8, forever. In the town that can't give her what she needs. With the family that loves her but can't understand her. Playing her saxophone on the front porch while the neighborhood murmurs around her and the plant glows on the horizon. There is a specific episode that crystallizes Lisa's situation more precisely than any other. Season 2's Moaning Lisa, which aired in 1990 and remains one of the most unusual episodes the show has ever produced. Lisa wakes up sad. Not for any specific reason, just sad. The sadness is there when she opens her eyes, and it's still there at breakfast and at school, and it follows her through the episode without resolution. Because the episode is honest enough to acknowledge that some sadness doesn't have a specific cause and doesn't require a specific cure. Some sadness is just the appropriate emotional response to being a particular kind of person in a particular kind of world. In the course of the episode, she meets Bleeding Gums Murphy, the jazz musician, and they play together, and the playing is a release, not a solution, but a release. A way of putting the sadness somewhere it can be useful. A way of converting private pain into shared sound. And Marge, watching this, decides that she has been wrong to tell Lisa to smile and pretend. That the better thing is to let Lisa feel what she feels, to validate the sadness rather than suppress it. To trust that a child who can feel this deeply can also eventually find her way through. It's a small episode. It doesn't have a plot in any conventional sense. But it's one of the show's great truths. That children who feel things intensely need to be met in their feeling rather than managed out of it. That intelligence without emotional validation is its own kind of wound. That the saxophone is not just a character prop. It's the shape of Lisa's emotional life given form. Bart is harder to talk about than Lisa because the show presents him primarily as a force, an engine of chaos, an id that has been given a skateboard and pointed at the world. The comedy of Bart is so effective and so dominant that it tends to crowd out everything else about him. But Bart has depths that the show accesses less often than it should, and they are worth sitting with. Bart is not stupid. This is important and often overlooked. He tests as an underachiever, his grades are catastrophic, his attention in class is essentially non-existent. But these are not the markers of low intelligence. They're the markers of a mind that has not found its alignment with the educational system Springfield provides. When Bart is engaged, when something actually interests him, he is quick and sharp and creative in ways that his report cards completely fail to capture. He is also, underneath the pranks and the defiance, deeply worried about being abandoned. More so than the show usually acknowledges. His relationship with Homer carries this anxiety. Homer, for all his obliviousness, is the person Bart most wants to impress. The strangling gag, Homer's reflexive hands around Bart's neck, response to whatever Bart has done wrong is funny, and it's also a strange kind of contact. It's not nothing, it's Homer responding, it's Homer even in frustration, even in the comic violence of a cartoon, Homer is paying attention to Bart. The episodes in which Homer genuinely connects with Bart, in which they fish together or work on a project together or simply exist in the same space without the usual tension, are some of the show's most emotionally resonant. Because Bart in those moments is recognizable in a way his usual chaos doesn't quite allow. He is a kid who wants his father to be proud of him, a kid who performs rebellion because rebellion is what gets a response, and a response is what he needs, and any response, even strangling, is better than the indifference he fears most. Bart's educational failures are worth examining in some detail because they reveal something about Springfield's institutional failures that the show is rarely explicit about. Springfield Elementary is not a good school. This is established and restated across hundreds of episodes. The funding is inadequate, the curriculum is questionable. The administration, under Principal Skinner's anxious management, prioritizes institutional peace over actual learning. The teachers are undersupported and frequently burned out. But even given all of that, the specific shape of Bart's failure raises questions. He has been in the same grade for 36 years. He has failed to advance academically while also, in various episodes, demonstrating that he can read, write, think logically, and learn new skills quickly when motivated. His failure is specific. It's not global cognitive limitation. It's a targeted inability to perform within the particular structures that Springfield Elementary uses to measure academic success. This is, in fact, a real pattern that educational research has documented extensively. Children whose intelligence doesn't align with the dominant learning styles of their educational environment, children who are kinesthetic learners or visual learners or who need more movement or different pacing than a conventional classroom provides, often appear to be failures by conventional academic metrics while being perfectly capable learners in different contexts. The tragedy of Bart at Springfield Elementary is not that he's not intelligent. It's that the institution is not equipped to recognize his intelligence, and neither he nor the people responsible for his education have the tools or the incentive to figure out what environment would actually work for him. He falls through the cracks, and the cracks in Springfield are wide enough to fit a 10-year-old boy who has been falling for 36 years and still hasn't reached the bottom. The relationship between Bart and Lisa is one of the show's great ongoing tensions. They are close in the way that siblings are close when they're 2 years apart in a small house, thrown into proximity by circumstance, forced to develop a shorthand with each other that substitutes for the understanding they can't quite reach. They are also deeply alien to each other. Lisa's world is organized around knowledge and principle. Bart's is organized around experience and sensation. She reads. He does. She plans. He reacts. She looks ahead. He looks at what's right in front of him, usually something on fire, but the show keeps demonstrating that underneath the surface incompatibility, something holds. They protect each other. Not always publicly, not in ways either of them would readily admit, but consistently. When it matters, when the stakes are real, Bart and Lisa are reliably on the same side. This is the show's argument about family. Not that family members understand each other, or like each other, or share values or approaches to the world, but that some bonds are made of something tougher than understanding. Some relationships hold precisely because they've been tested by the weight of shared history, by the thousand small moments of being alive in the same house as another person, by the accumulated evidence that this person, alien as they might be to you, is yours. There's a character that exists at the edge of Bart and Lisa's world that deserves attention. A character who represents something specific about childhood in Springfield that doesn't get discussed much. Milhouse Van Houten. Milhouse is Bart's best friend, which is to say that he is the person who is available when Bart needs someone to do things with. Their friendship is asymmetrical in ways the show is quite honest about. Bart uses Milhouse, casually, routinely, without particular malice, the way that charismatic children often use their less charismatic friends as support structures and audiences and assistants in adventures that are primarily designed to serve the charismatic child's needs. But Milhouse loves Bart, with a completeness and a consistency that is slightly heartbreaking given how unequally it's distributed. Milhouse's devotion to Bart is the organizing principle of his social life. Bart is the thing that makes Springfield navigable for Milhouse, who is awkward and anxious and aware of his own social shortcomings in ways that Bart, confident in his own charisma, never has to be. Milhouse's parents' divorce, which the show treats as a recurring source of comedy, sits differently if you look at Milhouse's face in the moments when the joke isn't quite carrying the weight. He's a child whose family has broken apart, who lives in two houses, who has watched the unit he was supposed to be able to count on demonstrate that it can, in fact, fail. Who watches Bart's family, chaotic and dysfunctional as it is, maintain itself with a consistency that his own cannot, and who finds in Bart's friendship the closest approximation of a reliable thing his world currently offers. The children of Springfield are all, in various ways, carrying things they shouldn't have to carry at 10 and 8 and 1 year old. They carry the weight of the town they're growing up in, the water they drink and the air they breathe, and the institutional failures of the school system and the community. They carry the weight of their parents' unresolved histories, the damage that has been passed down through generations, the patterns that want to repeat themselves. And they carry it the way children do, which is without full awareness that they're carrying it at all. They just feel the weight. They don't have a name for it yet. Maggie. We need to talk about Maggie again, now, in this section, through the lens of what she might become, rather than what she already is. The flash-forward episodes have been relatively consistent about one thing. The future they depict for Lisa and Bart involves growth and change, and the reckoning of adults with the patterns of their childhood. Lisa becomes more of herself. Bart becomes, eventually, someone who has had to account for what he was. These are the futures of people who were fully formed children, who have clear trajectories, whose adult selves are legible in their child selves if you look carefully. But Maggie's future, in the few glimpses we've gotten of it, is different in kind. She is always doing something remarkable, something unexpected, something that suggests her adult life will not look like anyone else's in Springfield. The child who never spoke, the child who watched everything, the child whose intelligence was tested and found to be off the charts. That child, grown, is a person who exists outside the categories Springfield uses to sort people. She is not contained by the town the way her siblings are contained by it. She is not even contained by her own family, who have spent her entire childhood failing to notice what she is. She watches. She waits. And eventually, somewhere in a future the show keeps glimpsing, but never fully depicting, she acts. What Maggie acts on is the great unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. The show knows what it is. The show has always known. It just hasn't told us yet. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe some things deserve to stay a mystery a little longer. To let the weight of the waiting build. To let the silence speak for itself. Section 7. Marge's untold story. The woman holding everything together. There is a bias in the way most people discuss The Simpsons, and it's a bias the show itself sometimes encourages. The bias runs like this. The show is really about Homer. Homer is the center of gravity. The comedy comes from Homer. The pathos comes from Homer. The theories, the mysteries, the hidden depths, all of it radiates outward from Homer's large yellow body. Marge is the counterweight, the stabilizer, the sensible one, the patient one, the one who holds the household together while Homer is busy generating the plot. This reading is not wrong, but it isn't complete in a way that does Marge a significant disservice. Because if you look at the show carefully, if you track what Marge is actually doing in the episodes, where Homer isn't the focal point, you find something much more interesting than a counterweight. You find a person in a constant negotiation between what she wants and what she can have. A person who has built her entire life around a set of choices she made very young and has spent decades asking herself, quietly, whether they were the right ones. A person who has enormous capacity for many things, for painting, for bowling, for business, for the work of being genuinely excellent at whatever she turns her attention to, and who has directed most of that capacity into the daily labor of maintaining a household that is perpetually under siege. Marge's story is one of the most honest things The Simpsons has ever told, and it's told sideways, in the episodes that are ostensibly about something else, in the moments between the jokes. Let's start with what Marge wants. This is a harder question than it sounds because Marge is genuinely happy with parts of her life. She loves her children. She loves Homer, with a specificity and a commitment that is not delusional. She finds meaning in the work of family making, not because she's been conditioned to find meaning there, and not because she has no other options, but because there is real value in it, and she knows it. But Marge also wants things she doesn't have. She wants to be seen as a person in her own right, rather than as a function. She wants to be asked what she thinks before the decision has already been made. She wants the work she does, the invisible architecture of daily life, the scheduling and the anticipation and the endless small repairs to the fabric of the family's existence, to be acknowledged as work. She wants sometimes to be somewhere else, not to leave Homer, not to abandon her children, but to occupy a space that is entirely her own, that isn't defined by her relationship to anyone else, where the things she's capable of are the measure of her rather than the measure of her service to others. The show has given her these things, briefly, in specific episodes. Her time as a painter produced work of genuine quality. Her stint as a police officer revealed competence and physical capability. Her real estate career showed strategic intelligence and interpersonal skill. Her bowling prowess was nothing short of extraordinary. In every domain she has tried, she has excelled. And then she returns to the kitchen, to the household, to Homer and the children, and the ongoing project of making family happen. This is not presented as defeat, and it would be wrong to read it as defeat. But it is presented honestly, which is different. The show acknowledges the cost of the choice. It acknowledges that Marge is someone who could have been many things. It doesn't pretend that being a housewife in Springfield is the full expression of her potential. It just says this is what she chose, and she chose it for reasons that are real and weighty, and she lives with the choice every day with a grace that is not passive but active, not acceptance but commitment. Marge's childhood is not explored in as much detail as Homer's, but the pieces that the show has given us are revealing. She comes from the Bouvier family. Her parents, particularly her father, Clancy Bouvier, are depicted in flashbacks as loving but emotionally constricted. Her mother, Jacqueline, is critical in the particular way that mothers who married beneath their ambitions can be critical, a disappointment-shaped love that has been refined over decades into a precision instrument. Marge grew up as the good one. In a family with Selma and Patty, her twin sisters, she was the one who didn't cause trouble, who did well in school, who was pretty and pleasant and gave her parents something to feel good about. She was the success story, the evidence that the Bouvier family had produced something fine. And then she fell for Homer Simpson. Homer, who was even then the specific combination of disaster and sweetness that he has remained ever since. Homer, who was demonstrably not what Jacqueline Bouvier had imagined for her daughter. Homer, who would never be a success story by any conventional measure. Marge chose him anyway. Chose him at an age when she was young enough that the choice was partly romantic courage and partly insufficient information about what the choice would actually require of her. She has been making that choice again, every day since, with full information, and choosing the same way every time. This is what the show respects about Marge. Not that she made a perfect choice, not that Homer is objectively worthy of her, but that the choice is genuinely hers. That she has looked at the life she has and at the man she has it with, and has found something in it that keeps being worth choosing. Not comfort, not habit, not the inertia of a life that's too established to redo, but something more active, something that resembles, improbably, love. The episodes centered on Marge's discontent are some of the most underrated in the show's run. Season 1's Life on the Fast Lane, which was the first episode to win an Emmy, depicts Marge falling into an emotional affair with Jacques, a bowling instructor played by Albert Brooks. The episode is extraordinary in how seriously it takes Marge's desire. It doesn't frame her attraction to Jacques as a moral failing or a weakness. It frames it as a real response to a real need that Homer has been failing to meet. Marge is, in this episode, genuinely considering leaving. Not in the vague, hypothetical way that unhappy spouses consider leaving when they haven't quite admitted it to themselves. Actually considering, making the choice, in her mind, to go to Jacques, to choose something for herself that doesn't require her to maintain the structure of the family at the expense of her own needs. And then Homer, in what might be the best moment of his entire run, does something that Homer almost never does. He sees her. He puts down his things and drives to where she is, and he just shows up, and she comes back to him not because he made a speech or made a promise or fixed anything, but because he showed up, because he came to find her, because for one moment he was paying attention in the right direction. It's a small thing, it always is with Homer, but it's enough. It keeps being enough. And the tragedy of Marge's life, insofar as there is one, is not that Homer isn't good enough for her. It's that he is good enough, just barely, in exactly the specific way she needs him to be, just often enough to make staying the right choice, even when it's hard. Even when the leaving would be easier. Marge's mental health is something the show touches on obliquely and infrequently, but with some of the most genuine writing it has ever produced. In the Season 4 episode Fear of Flying, Marge's fear of airplanes is treated as a plot device until the final act, when it turns out to be rooted in a childhood trauma. And in the therapy scenes that follow, there's a moment of authentic recognition of how unprocessed emotional experience accumulates in a person over years. How the thing that looks like an irrational fear is actually a completely rational response to an old wound that never healed. The therapy works. Marge makes progress. The episode ends on genuine resolution, which is unusual for a television comedy. What's more unusual is the implication. If Marge has been carrying unprocessed childhood trauma into her adult life, if there are things she has never fully examined or resolved, then some of what looks like equanimity might be something closer to suppression. Some of the patience might be displacement. Some of the holding it together might be holding something down. The show doesn't pursue this. It can't, in the format it operates in. The reset button gets pressed. Marge is fine again by the next episode. But the window opened in Fear of Flying, and what it looked onto was a person carrying more than anyone can see from the outside, in the way that the most capable and apparently strong people often carry the most. Here's what is true about Marge that the show has demonstrated without ever quite stating. She is the reason the family exists as a unit. Not as a matter of logistics, though she does most of the logistical work of the household. As a matter of cohesion. As the emotional center around which the family organizes itself. Homer is the engine, chaotic and powerful and impossible to predict. Bart is the propulsion. Lisa is the conscience, but Maggie is the mystery, and Marge is the gravity, the force that keeps them in orbit around each other rather than flying off in separate directions. This is an enormous amount to be. It is, in many ways, more than a person should have to be. The gravity of a family is not a glamorous role. It doesn't have obvious achievements. Nobody gives awards for the conversations that prevented crises. Nobody marks the moments when the family almost fell apart, and the reason it didn't was that one person was paying close enough attention to catch it before it hit the floor. But the show knows. Even when it uses Marge primarily as a foil for Homer's chaos, it knows what it's doing. The choice to make Marge patient, to make her the anchor, is not a limitation of her character. It's a recognition of what anchor means, what it costs, what strength it actually requires to be the thing everything else is held in place by. Marge Simpson is not the simple character the show's surface presentation suggests. She is the most complex thing in Springfield. She is a person who chose, fully and continuously, to build something with her life rather than to be something, to make a home that held people rather than to occupy a space that impressed them. And in a show full of people who are trapped, who are broken, who are running from things or toward things or paralyzed in place, she is almost the only character who is exactly where she chose to be. That's not nothing. In Springfield, that might be everything. Section 8. The dark economy of Springfield. Money, power, and who really controls the town. Springfield's economic life is, on the surface, the same kind of cheerfully incoherent background detail that most long-running sitcoms use to generate plot without worrying too much about internal consistency. Businesses open and close. Fortunes are made and lost within episodes. The Simpson family is simultaneously broke enough to worry about bills and comfortable enough to own a house and take vacations and eat at restaurants. But underneath the cheerful incoherence, the show has been building a coherent picture of how power actually operates in a small American town. And it's not pretty. The power structure of Springfield is simple once you see it. At the top is Mr. Burns, not as a participant in a system, as the origin of the system. Everything flows from Burns, the electrical power that runs the town, the employment that a significant portion of the population depends on, the political contributions that keep the local government manageable, the ownership of subsidiary businesses and real estate that makes resistance economically impractical, the information gathered by decades of surveillance and leverage. Burns doesn't run Springfield through obvious coercion. He runs it through the architecture of dependency. Every resident of Springfield who works at the plant is dependent on Burns for their livelihood. Every business that relies on plant workers as customers is dependent on those workers having money, which means dependent on Burns. The school system is funded partly by tax revenue generated by the plant and partly by occasional donations that come with conditions. The politicians are funded by contributions that don't require explicit instructions because everyone understands what implicit obligations look like. This is how real economic power works in real small towns. It doesn't require threats. It doesn't require overt control. It requires only the creation of a system in which resistance is economically irrational, in which challenging the power at the top of the hierarchy costs more than most people can afford to pay. Springfield is an extraordinarily faithful depiction of this dynamic. The show has been staging it for 36 years with remarkable consistency. Moe's Tavern is one of the most important economic indicators in Springfield, and one of the most honest depictions of what small-scale American commerce actually looks like when the macroeconomic forces don't favor it. Moe is perpetually on the edge of bankruptcy. His business survives on the custom of a handful of regulars who drink just enough to keep the lights on, but not enough to constitute a business model. He has tried, across dozens of episodes, to pivot the tavern into something more economically viable. He has converted it to a TGI Fridays-style family restaurant. He has attempted to sell it. He has tried to reinvent his signature cocktail as a national brand. He has taken on investors. He has changed the name, the concept, the menu, the clientele. None of it has worked. The tavern survives. It's not clear why. By the logic of the market, it should have closed decades ago. But it persists, generation after generation, of economic near-death experience in the way that certain kinds of essential community infrastructure persist, even when the economics don't support them. The dive bar, the diner, the neighborhood hardware store, these things exist at the intersection of economic activity and social function. And their social function is sometimes what keeps them alive when the economics should have killed them. What Moe provides to Springfield is not beer. Beer is available everywhere. What Moe provides is a place where the specific kind of man that Springfield produces in quantity, the working-class man with no money and a great deal of available time and a general sense that things are not quite right in the world, can sit and be among his kind without pretense. Where Homer can be Homer without anyone requiring him to be more than that. Where the failures of Springfield's economy can be processed in real time over warm beer with people who share the experience. That function has value. It has always had value. The market doesn't know how to price it, which is why places like Moe's are always on the edge of failing, always just barely surviving. Because the thing they provide is real and important and entirely external to the logic of profit. The Quickie Mart chain deserves examination as a piece of Springfield's economic architecture, because its presence in the town raises questions about the relationship between corporate structure and local community. The Quickie Mart is a franchise. Apu runs the local unit, but the brand and the products and the operational standards come from somewhere else, from the corporate parent whose headquarters we see briefly in one episode as an impossibly efficient operation run by a man who appears to be godlike in his commercial omniscience. Apu pays franchise fees. He operates under rules set by people who have never been to Springfield and never will be. This is, again, a completely accurate picture of how a significant portion of small-town American retail actually works. The stores that anchor community life in most American towns are not locally owned. They are franchise operations, subsidiaries, branches. The money they generate flows upward out of the community rather than circulating within it. The decisions that affect the local operation are made far away by people with no stake in the specific community, based on metrics that don't capture what the store means to the people who use it. Apu's doctorate in computer science is doing work here that the show doesn't make explicit. He is an extraordinarily educated man running a franchise operation for a corporation that doesn't know him. His education and his intelligence and his considerable human capacities are in service of moving product for someone else's profit. This is not unusual. This is how most of the American workforce spends its time. But the gap between what Apu is and what Apu does for a living is a gap the show keeps measuring without ever filling. Burns's wealth deserves its own extended consideration because it is not just wealth in the ordinary sense. It is antiquated wealth. Old money from old industries in an era when the industries that made that money are no longer either morally acceptable or economically dominant. Burns built his fortune on nuclear power. He maintains it on nuclear power. In a world that has spent decades debating the future of nuclear energy, Burns has simply continued to operate his plant without updating, without retrofitting, without responding to the regulatory and safety conversations happening everywhere around him. He has built his survival on the political influence to avoid accountability, the legal resources to resist enforcement, and the economic centrality to make the community dependent enough that challenging him is functionally self-destructive. This is a portrait of a specific kind of American economic power that the show drew in the early 90s and has been maintaining ever since. The power of capital that is old enough to predate the social structures designed to regulate it. The power of money that was made before the rules that would have prevented its making were written, and that has since purchased enough of the rule-writing apparatus to prevent the retroactive application of those rules. Burns is not just a villain in the comedy sense. He is a structural argument about the relationship between inherited wealth and democratic accountability, about what happens when a fortune is old enough and large enough to exist outside the normal mechanisms of social control, about the way that economic power, accumulated over generations, eventually becomes its own kind of weather, permanent, impersonal, impossible to hold accountable because it has no face. Except Burns does have a face, and the face is ancient and terrible and occasionally glows in the dark. The show's depiction of Springfield's labor relations is one of its most consistently sharp critiques of American economic life. Homer, as a union member, has been involved in the Springfield nuclear plant's labor negotiations across several episodes. These episodes are unusual in American comedy television because they take the labor side seriously. They depict the union, imperfect and occasionally corrupt as it is, as a genuine advocate for the workers' interests. They depict the workers as people with legitimate grievances and legitimate stakes in the outcome of those negotiations. They depict management, Burns and his representatives, as opponents in a conflict over real interests rather than simply as obstacles to be overcome. This framing was unusual in the 90s and would be unusual now. Most American television comedy treats labor relations as a source of comedic absurdity. The incompetent union versus the incompetent management, all of it noise. The Simpsons treats it as a legitimate conflict with real consequences for real people. The episode where Homer becomes the union president and has to negotiate with Burns is one of the most sophisticated pieces of political comedy the show has ever produced. Homer is genuinely in over his head. He doesn't have the strategic intelligence or the knowledge base to be an effective negotiator. But he has something that the professional negotiators on both sides don't have. He actually cares about the specific people whose lives the outcome will affect. He knows the people on the floor. He knows what matters to them. He knows which concessions are acceptable and which are existential. This knowledge doesn't save him from his own limitations. But the show honors it. The show says that caring about the right thing, even from a position of incompetence, is worth something. That the workers who elected Homer and the workers who need someone to speak for them are not wrong to need that speaking, even if Homer is an imperfect vessel for it. It's a quietly radical piece of television for something disguised as a cartoon. The underground economy of Springfield is worth a note, because the show has spent 36 years building a picture of an informal economic layer that exists beneath the official one. The mob, which appears in Springfield in the person of Fat Tony and his associates, is not a dramatic intrusion into otherwise ordinary small-town life. It is described and depicted as an integrated part of Springfield's economic ecosystem. The mob provides services that the legitimate economy doesn't or won't. They enforce contracts in contexts where the legal system is too corrupt or too slow to be useful. They supply goods that regulation has made officially unavailable. They operate in the spaces between the legitimate economy's acknowledged functions. And Springfield, being Springfield, treats this with the same equanimity it treats everything else. Yes, there's organized crime. Yes, some of the businesses you patronize have mob involvement. This is just how things are. This is just part of the texture of the place. This is not cynicism exactly. It's the show being honest about how small American economies actually work, about the informal networks and arrangements and understandings that exist beneath the surface of every community, about the fact that the distinction between legitimate business and illegitimate business is sometimes less clear in practice than it is in theory, and that communities learn to live with that blurriness because the alternative is a clarity that would require dismantling too many things people have learned to depend on. The economy of Springfield is not broken. It works. It produces something for most of its residents. It keeps Moe's open and the Quickie Mart stocked and Homer employed and the lights on. The fact that it works through mechanisms that don't bear too close examination is not a flaw. It's a feature. It's the specific way that Springfield has learned to survive in the world Burns has made for it. Section 9. The Treehouse of Horror Canon. What the Halloween episodes reveal about the real show. Every October, The Simpsons steps outside itself. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, which have been running annually since season 2, operate under a completely different set of rules than the regular episodes. Characters die and don't come back. The laws of physics are explicitly optional. The darkness that the regular show keeps carefully managed behind comedy and heart is allowed to come to the surface. Things that would be too bleak or too violent or too definitively final for a regular episode are permitted here. Most fans treat the Treehouse of Horror episodes as Elseworlds. Fun diversions, not canon, disconnected from the ongoing story of the Simpson family. But there's another way to read them, and it's been suggested by writers associated with the show over the years. What if the Halloween episodes aren't departures from the show's reality, but extensions of it? What if the specific horror stories the show chooses to tell, year after year, in the special context of the Halloween format, reveal something about the show's deepest anxieties that the regular episodes can't quite express? The first Treehouse of Horror episode aired in 1990, and it established 3 stories: The Bad Dream House, Hungry Are the Damned, and The Raven. Looking at these 3 stories now, 3 decades later, what's striking is how directly they engage with the core preoccupations of the show, even in their most cartoonishly exaggerated form. The Bad Dream House is about a family that moves into a house that wants to destroy them. A house that has accumulated so much evil in its walls that it corrupts everyone who lives inside it. The family is threatened, the children are endangered, the father is compromised. And in the end, the house, confronted with the Simpson family's specific combination of chaos and love, chooses to destroy itself rather than continue to exist in their presence. This is funny. It's also, if you read it sideways, about the way environments shape families, about the way that a corrupted environment, a contaminated town, a house built on wrong ground exerts pressure on the people inside it. The Simpsons live in Springfield. Springfield wants to destroy them in slow motion. And the family, through the specific combination of love and dysfunction, and the kind of resilience that comes from having nothing to protect except each other, keeps surviving. The house implodes rather than contain them. That's not just a punchline. That's a statement. The Treehouse of Horror segments that return to the theme of bodily transformation are some of the most revealing in the series. Homer as a werewolf, Bart as a vampire hunter or a vampire, Lisa encountering a world where physical transformation is the mechanism of horror, Marge as a witch. The transformations in Treehouse of Horror are played for comedy, but they consistently center on a specific anxiety: the fear that the human body is not stable, that it can be changed, corrupted, altered by external forces into something other than itself. Under the radiation theory, this anxiety is not metaphorical. It's the suppressed awareness of something real. The bodies of Springfield's residents have been changed. They have 4 fingers. They have yellow skin. They have proportions that deviate from normal human anatomy. The cartoon style that codes as exaggeration is actually, within the show's internal logic, documentation. The Halloween episodes are where the show lets the body horror out, where it stages, in the safe container of a horror anthology format, the fears that the regular episodes are too busy being funny to acknowledge directly. The fear that the bodies of the people in Springfield are not quite right, that something has gotten into them, that the transformation has been happening all along, slowly, invisibly, one generation at a time. The Treehouse of Horror episodes that deal with mind control and the alteration of consciousness are equally revealing. There are several segments across the franchise's run in which an external force takes control of Springfield's residents. The town becomes controlled by a single corporate entity, or by an alien intelligence, or by a technology that overrides individual will. The residents of Springfield, already compromised in their ability to think critically about their circumstances, become fully automated, fully obedient, fully unable to resist. The comedy in these segments comes from the contrast between the horror of the concept and the Springfield residents' complete inability to notice or resist what's happening to them. They are being controlled. They know it. They just don't think it's particularly alarming. That's how Springfield works. That's just Tuesday. The horror here is not in the science fiction mechanism. The horror is in the recognition that the gap between mind control and the ordinary operation of Springfield society is not as large as it should be. A population that can be induced to not notice three-eyed fish and cracked cooling towers and human skeletons in the basement of a nuclear plant is already operating at a level of reduced critical function that makes external control largely redundant. The mind control of the Halloween specials is a dramatic expression of something that the regular show depicts in a more mundane key. Springfield doesn't need to be controlled by aliens. It's doing fine without them. There's a specific Treehouse of Horror segment that deserves extended attention because it sits at the intersection of horror comedy and genuine philosophical strangeness in a way that very few things on television have managed. In the segment Homer 3, Homer discovers a portal in the wall of the Simpsons house that leads into a three-dimensional world. He steps through. He enters a world that is rendered in early computer graphics, a world that is clearly artificial, clearly constructed, clearly not the cartoon reality he comes from. And then the segment asks the question that it never quite comes out and asks directly, which world is the real one? Homer is in a constructed world. He can see the edges of it. He can see, if he looks carefully, that the world he has entered was made, was designed, has seams. But the world he came from, the two-dimensional cartoon world of Springfield, is also constructed, also designed, also has seams that you can find if you look for them. The segment ends with Homer falling through the constructed world and arriving in what appears to be the real world. Live action. Actual streets. Actual buildings. He is Homer Simpson, a cartoon character, walking through a real city, looking around with his cartoon eyes at things that are irrefutably real. It's played as a punchline. It's also one of the most genuinely disorienting things the show has ever done. Because the question it raises, which world is real, is the same question that the coma theory asks, the same question that the radiation theory asks, the same question that the show has been building toward for 36 years without quite asking out loud. What if the world Homer is living in is not the world he thinks it is? What if the reality he experiences is a construction, a rendering, something designed and maintained for purposes that aren't his? What if there's another world on the other side of the wall and Homer has been in the wrong one all along? The frequency with which the Treehouse of Horror segments feature death, not as a permanent condition but as a temporary one, as something that happens and then doesn't quite stick, is notable. Characters die in the Halloween specials. They die in ways that are final and irrevocable. And then they come back, or they exist in a state after death, or the story simply continues with the dead character as though death were an inconvenience rather than an ending. This is partly the horror format doing what horror formats do, playing with mortality as a source of dramatic tension. But it's also, in the context of the show's larger mythology, a reflection of Springfield's relationship with consequence. Nothing sticks in Springfield. Not catastrophe, not death, not transformation, not revelation. The reset button is always available. The morning after always arrives. The family always ends up back on the couch. The Treehouse of Horror episodes stage this non-sticking in its most extreme form. Death itself doesn't stick here. The most final consequence possible is temporary in Springfield. And if death is temporary, what isn't? The Halloween specials are 33 episodes of the show answering its own most fundamental question in horror anthology format. The question is, what would happen if consequences were real? What would happen if the things Springfield has been doing to itself actually mattered? What would the town look like if the radiation actually killed people? If the lies actually destroyed families? If the resets actually failed? The answer is, it would look like a horror show. And the show knows it. Every October, it shows you. And then it puts the costumes away for another year and goes back to being a comedy. But the horror is in there. It has always been in there. Waiting for Halloween. Section 10. The bottom of the iceberg. The theories that change everything. We've been going down for a long time now. Through the surface of Springfield. Through its yellow skin and its dark economy and its hidden character depths and its strange relationship with God and horror and time. Through Homer's biography and Marge's choices and the children's futures and the mechanics of how the town maintains its impossible reality. And now we're at the bottom, the place the iceberg theories live. The readings of the show that, once encountered, are very difficult to unsee. The ones that the show's creators have sometimes acknowledged and sometimes denied, and sometimes addressed so obliquely that the acknowledgement itself becomes a form of evidence. Let's go through them carefully. There's no hurry. Springfield isn't going anywhere. The radiation theory, which we've touched on throughout this video, deserves its full statement here. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned by Charles Montgomery Burns. It has, canonically, 342 safety violations. It has been dumping radioactive waste into the local water supply and onto children's playgrounds. Its cooling towers are cracked and have been patched with improvised materials. Its safety inspector is Homer Simpson, a man with an IQ of 55 and a crayon in his brain. The first visible mutant in Springfield's environment appears in Season 2. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, is pulled from a river near the plant and becomes briefly national news. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television. The town watches and moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody asks what the fish with 3 eyes suggests about the people drinking the same water. The answer has been visible the whole time. The people drinking the same water as Blinky are yellow. They have 4 fingers. Their proportions deviate from normal human anatomy in consistent population-wide ways that correlate with the proximity to the plant. They are slower, in aggregate, than the people who live outside the contamination zone. They forget things. They reset. They are unable, despite abundant evidence, to connect the cracked cooling towers to the shape of their own hands. Burns knows. The show has been explicit about this across many episodes. Burns undergoes weekly radiation treatments that keep him alive by managing the effects of his own chronic radiation exposure. He understands what radiation does to biological systems, because radiation is literally what keeps him alive. He has personal physicians and pharmaceutical resources, and the full infrastructure of enormous wealth directed at the ongoing project of managing his own contamination. He knows what the plant is doing to Springfield. He has always known. The plant is his. The contamination is his design, or at least his negligence. The population he has made dependent on the plant for their employment and their electricity is the same population that the plant has been slowly, invisibly, irreversibly remaking. The radiation theory doesn't explain one mystery about Springfield. It explains all of them. The aging, the yellow skin, the 4 fingers, the superhuman resilience, the cognitive impairment, the inability to sustain critical thinking about local circumstances. The persistent, multi-generational loyalty to a man who is actively harming them. These are not cartoon conveniences. They are a consistent, 36-year depiction of a population living inside a slow-motion environmental catastrophe. The Homer coma theory is the one that haunts people the most once they've heard it, because it's the one that's hardest to argue with. On April 1st, 1993, the Season 4 episode So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show aired. In it, Bart's April Fool's prank causes Homer to be hospitalized. While in his hospital bed, Homer sees a vending machine. He reaches for a candy bar. The machine tips over and crushes him. Homer enters a coma. A real coma. He flatlines. He wakes up. The episode ends. Homer has lost 5% of his brain function permanently and laughs about it despite not knowing why he's laughing. And that, the coma theory argues, is because he didn't actually wake up. That laugh is the last thing Homer's conscious mind generates before the dream begins. Every episode after that date is the product of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function, dreaming. The evidence for this is structural rather than specific. Before the coma episode, the show was grounded. The storylines dealt with recognizable domestic situations. After the coma, the show becomes something different. Homer goes to space. Homer meets God multiple times. Homer joins a secret society. Homer has 100 different careers. The show becomes increasingly detached from the gravitational field of ordinary life, increasingly surreal, increasingly difficult to connect to the realistic domestic drama it began as. This is exactly what you'd expect from a dream being generated by a deteriorating brain. The early episodes, the ones closest to the coma, are still coherent, still grounded, still running on the reference material of Homer's actual life. As the years pass, as the brain continues to degrade, the dream becomes stranger. The plot logic loosens. The physical constraints of the world become optional. The celebrities multiply as Homer's brain absorbs ambient stimuli from the hospital room. And nobody ages, because Homer's brain can't imagine them aging. The last time he saw his children, they were 10 and 8 and 1. His wife was in her middle 30s. His brain keeps them at those ages because those are the only versions of them it has. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It's a coma symptom. The show acknowledged this theory in season 34, in an episode that included a fake deleted scene of Homer waking from a coma and discovering that everything had been a dream. The show presented this as a hoax, as something planted by hackers, and then moved on. But the fact that they made it at all tells you something. The writers know about the theory. They've engaged with it seriously enough to build an elaborate fake acknowledgement of it. And their denial is wrapped inside an episode that explicitly depicts the thing they're denying. That's not a denial. That's a very careful, deniable confirmation. The Who Shot Mr. Burns question is the one that the show tried to solve and didn't quite manage. The summer of 1995. The show had spent season 6 building toward a genuine whodunit. Every character in Springfield had a motive. Burns had stolen oil from the school, bankrupted Moe's Tavern, destroyed the retirement home, built a machine to block out the sun. He had fired Smithers. He had made Homer's employment contingent on Burns, never learning his name. He had done everything short of a formal declaration of war against Springfield's entire community. And then someone shot him. The show told us it was Maggie. Burns woke from his coma and identified her. She was in the parking lot. His gun fell. She picked it up. The gun went off. And the official answer is Maggie. The show committed to it. But the evidence doesn't quite fit. Burns's holster was already empty before the shooting, meaning the gun had been taken from him before the encounter in the parking lot. Burns's last words before being shot were, "Oh, it's you," the greeting of a man who recognizes someone he knows, someone he doesn't find threatening. Does Burns know Maggie? Has he ever interacted with her in a way that would produce recognition? The contest the show ran to find the shooter found no winner. Nobody in a randomly selected sample of thousands of entries identified Maggie. Nobody correctly predicted the answer from the clues in Part 1, which was supposed to contain enough evidence to solve the mystery. Either the clues were insufficient or the answer didn't logically follow from them. Homer confesses in Season 18 in a throwaway line that he was the one who shot Burns. Nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. The show treats it as a joke and moves on. But Homer had the clearest motive of anyone in Springfield. He had the most personal grievance. And the pattern of Burns's behavior toward Homer, the deliberate use of a broken, dependent man as an incompetent safety inspector, the management of Homer's employment as a strategic resource, suggests a relationship that goes far beyond ordinary employer-employee indifference. Burns needed Homer, and Homer, at some level of his damaged and radiation-impaired consciousness, might have known it. The shooting was never solved. It was closed. In Springfield, these are two very different things. The Principal Skinner revelation is the one that made fans angriest when it aired in 1997, and it's the one that, on reflection, says the most true and uncomfortable thing the show has ever said. The man Springfield knows as Principal Seymour Skinner is not Seymour Skinner. He is Armin Tamzorian, a former street criminal who assumed the identity of a Vietnam veteran when he came to Springfield to deliver news of that veteran's death, and found that the dead man's mother needed him to be her son. He became Seymour Skinner. He built a life inside the borrowed identity. He ran Springfield Elementary for 20 years. And when the real Seymour Skinner returned, when the truth was exposed, Springfield held a meeting and voted to keep the lie. The real Skinner was tied to a train and removed from Springfield. The judge decreed that the imposter was the real Skinner. It was made illegal to ever mention the truth again, under penalty of torture. This is the most honest thing Springfield has ever done. Not the deception, the vote. The moment when the community looked at the truth and looked at the comfortable lie and made a collective, deliberate choice to protect the lie and exile the truth. To make memory illegal. To enforce forgetfulness with the machinery of law. The fans hated this episode. They called it a betrayal of the character, a destruction of Skinner's history, a casual dismissal of 2 decades of carefully built backstory. They're not wrong. All of that is true. But what they called betrayal, the show was calling diagnosis. Springfield has always voted to keep its lies. It has always chosen the comfortable falsehood over the expensive truth. The plant is not poisoning the water. The billionaire is not our enemy. Our principal is not an imposter. The fish with 3 eyes is a quirk of nature, not evidence of a crime. The vote to keep Skinner is not a plot contrivance. It's the infrastructure of Springfield's impossible reality made visible. The machinery that keeps the reset button working. The social contract that says we will not acknowledge what happened because acknowledging it would cost too much. And anyone who insists on the truth, anyone who stands up and says but he's not who he says he is, gets tied to a train. And expelled from the community. And the last honest man is somewhere out there, riding a train away from the town that made his honesty a crime. The Mona Simpson conspiracy is the one that connects Burns to Homer's damage in the most direct and devastating way. Homer's mother was alive. For the first 6 seasons of the show, she was dead. Abe had told Homer she died. The grave was shown. Homer mourned. In season 7, it was revealed that she was alive. That she had been driven underground by Burns, who had identified her during a raid on his biological weapons facility, who had reported her to the FBI, who had maintained a personal vendetta against a woman who destroyed one of his operations for decades. Mona was forced to abandon her family, to kiss Homer goodbye while he slept and disappear, to let him grow up believing she was dead, to let him build a personality around maternal loss, and the specific damage that maternal loss produces when it's never grieved, because it's never understood. Burns caused this. Burns ruined this family across 3 generations. Mona spent her life as a fugitive. Abe spent his life covering a lie and making deals with the enemy. Homer grew up damaged and dependent and cognitively impaired and working throughout his adult life for the man who destroyed his childhood. Homer doesn't connect the dots. Homer can't connect the dots. The crayon is in the way. The radiation is in the way. The decades of psychological damage from growing up without a mother are in the way. He can't see the architecture of his own suffering because the same forces that built that architecture also compromised his ability to read it. Burns won. Burns has always won. The most powerful man in Springfield. The man whose cracked cooling towers poisoned the water and whose personal vendetta ruined a family and whose deliberate management of an incompetent safety inspector has kept 342 violations from being fixed for decades. He sits at the top of his tower and watches Springfield function exactly as he designed it to function. A population too damaged to question him. An inspector too compromised to expose him. A political class too bought to challenge him. A community too dependent to resist. And Homer, working Sector 7G, eating his donut, sleeping at his console, being who he is in the only way he knows how to be it, because the man who made him this way also made sure this would be the shape of him. The floating timeline is the final mystery and the final truth of The Simpsons. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1. Homer and Marge are somewhere in their middle 30s. These ages are fixed. 36 years have passed. 788 episodes have aired. And the characters are exactly where they were. This is a cartoon convention. It's also, under the lens of every theory we've discussed tonight, the most eloquent piece of world building the show has ever produced. Every theory arrives at the same explanation through a different path. The coma theory says they don't age because they're inside the frozen memory of an unconscious man. His children will always be the ages they were when he last saw them. His wife will always be the woman he fell in love with. The dream preserves the last moment of his waking life in permanent amber because that's what love does to memory. The radiation theory says they don't age because their cellular biology has been fundamentally altered by decades of nuclear contamination. The same contamination that gives Homer his near indestructibility and his cognitive impairment, and the yellow skin has also, somehow, disrupted the normal processes of biological aging. They are trapped in a body that refuses to change because the change has already happened, at a level deeper than years, and nothing further can penetrate. The collective denial theory says they don't age because Springfield agrees they won't. Because admitting that Bart is growing up means admitting that time passes and things change and consequences accumulate, and the town is not the same as it was, and the plant is not the same as it was, and Burns is not the same as he was. And if any of that is true, all of it has to be reckoned with. So the agreement holds. Nobody ages, nobody changes, nobody asks. And the humanistic theory, the one that isn't really a theory, says they don't age because we won't let them. Because every Sunday night, every time we sit down with the remote and press play, we are choosing to return to the version of The Simpsons that is exactly as we remember it. The version where the kids are still small enough to hold, where the house is still chaotic and full and alive with the noise of a family that hasn't yet had to face what families eventually have to face. We built the loop. We keep it running, every view, every play, every moment of recognition. When a joke from 1993 still lands exactly as it should, we tighten the loop a little more. We make Springfield a little more permanent. We keep the family on the couch for one more episode. Because if they age, the show ends. And if the show ends, we have to admit that the specific version of home the show represents, the version that was fixed in our memory at the exact age we first watched it, is not something we can go back to. It's gone. It was always going to be gone. And the show, by refusing to age, has been keeping us from having to know that. The Simpsons is not just a cartoon. It's a time machine. A machine for returning to a version of family life that feels like yours, even when it isn't. A machine for experiencing, again and again, the specific warmth of a household that is messy and loud and imperfect and unkillably, stubbornly alive. And every theory in this video, every mystery, every hidden depth, every buried storyline and unanswered question and dark implication and contested truth, all of it is in service of the same thing the show has always been in service of. A family, on a couch, together, every Sunday night, forever. And that's the bottom of the iceberg, not a monster, not a catastrophe, not a conspiracy, though there are elements of all three. Just a family, preserved in amber, in a town that doesn't exist anywhere and exists everywhere, in a loop that started in 1989 and shows no sign of ending. Watched by people who keep coming back because the specific combination of recognition and warmth and sadness and laughter that the show produces is something they haven't found anywhere else. Maybe that's the real mystery of The Simpsons. Not who shot Burns or where Springfield is or whether Homer is dreaming. But why this show, out of all the shows, is the one that gets watched at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. The one that plays in the background of late nights and early mornings, the one that sounds like home. You know why. You've always known. You just needed 36 years of evidence to say it out loud. The Simpsons is the American family. Imperfect and unkillable and endlessly, quietly, desperately in love with itself. And as long as we keep watching, it will keep being. That's the whole story. That's all of it. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. If you're still awake somehow, somewhere at whatever hour this finds you, I hope it kept you company. Drop a comment, tell me where you are in the world and what time it is. And if you want more of this, subscribe. There are more icebergs to explore. Good night, sleep well, and try not to think too hard about the fish. End of script section 11. The Simpsons and the American Dream. What Springfield says about us. There's a conversation The Simpsons has been having with America for 36 years, and it's a conversation that America has mostly processed as entertainment without quite registering what's actually being said. The show is not just about a family, it's about an idea. The idea that a man can graduate high school without distinction, marry the woman he loves, work a steady job at a single employer, buy a house in a modest neighborhood, raise 3 children, and have a life. Not a remarkable life. Not a life that earns anyone's admiration or generates any particular achievement, but a life that is comfortable and connected and full of people who need him and whom he needs. A life that is enough. This is the American dream in its most basic, least aspirational form. Not the version that promises wealth or fame or social mobility or the transformation of circumstances. The version that simply promises that if you show up, if you work, if you stay, there will be something there for you. A place to be. People to be it with. The Simpsons has been testing this promise against the reality of American life for longer than most of its viewers have been alive. And the verdict it has delivered, quietly in episode after episode, is complicated. The promise is real. Homer has it. He has the house and the family and the job and the neighborhood. These things are real and they provide real sustenance. The warmth of the show, the thing that keeps people coming back across 36 seasons, is the warmth of that reality. The family is real. The love is real. The specific texture of a life lived in proximity to people who know you, who expect you, who have built their own lives around the assumption of your continued presence. This is real and it is good. But the promise has costs that it doesn't advertise. The house is possible because Homer was lucky enough to be born in a town with a major employer. The job is possible because Burns needs an incompetent safety inspector, and Homer is the most available incompetent person in Springfield. The stability of the life depends on the continued operation of the plant, which depends on the continued exploitation of the people who work in it and the community that lives around it. The American dream in Springfield is real, and it is paid for by things that nobody mentions. By the contaminated water, by the suppressed wages, by the medical care that doesn't look too hard at the things it would have to report, by the environmental damage that the community has decided it cannot afford to acknowledge, by the collective decision to keep the lie because the truth would cost everyone the life the lie provides. This is not unique to Springfield. This is the American dream as actually constituted, built on things that work when you don't look at them and that begin to come apart when you do. The show has been looking at them for 36 years, looking carefully and consistently, and presenting what it finds in the form of jokes because the truth, presented directly, is too much to sit with. Homer's relationship with work is the show's most sustained and most honest treatment of what labor actually feels like in the American middle-class economy. He hates his job. This is not ambiguous. Homer's job is something he endures. He sleeps at his console. He counts the hours. He invests the absolute minimum of himself in the work because the work deserves no more than the minimum. The work is a transaction, his labor for a paycheck, and the paycheck is the only meaningful thing the work offers him. And yet he has never seriously tried to leave. He has held hundreds of other jobs, as we've established, but he has always returned to Sector 7G. The other jobs are adventures. The plant is his identity, not because he values it, but because he has organized his financial life, his schedule, his sense of what Tuesday looks like, around its presence. This is one of the most accurate depictions of how many Americans experience their employment that television has ever produced. Not passionate hatred, not satisfied engagement, a kind of resigned coexistence with a reality that is neither good enough to embrace nor bad enough to resist. The job is there. It pays. It asks for time that would otherwise be unstructured. It provides a reason to get up in the morning that is external, and therefore easier than having to generate your own reasons. Homer does not dream of a better job. He dreams of no job. He dreams of an endless Saturday morning in his house in his underwear with his food and his television and his family nearby. The dream is not ambition. It's rest. The deep rest of someone who has been tired for a very long time. The specific economic anxiety of The Simpsons is worth examining in some detail because it has shifted over the show's run in ways that track American economic history more closely than most cultural commentary acknowledges. In the early seasons, the show's economic anxiety was primarily about scarcity. Homer and Marge struggled with bills. The household budget was a real concern. The gap between what they needed and what they had was present in specific, concrete ways. The car breaking down and not having the money to fix it, the medical bill that required a payment plan, the credit card debt that accumulated quietly while the family pretended not to notice. As the show has continued through the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, into the 2020s, the economic anxiety has shifted in texture. The scarcity is still there, but it's been joined by something else, a sense of precarity that is different from simple poverty. The uncertainty is no longer just about whether there's enough money. It's about whether the things that money is supposed to secure, the job, the house, the pension, the assumption of continued middle-class life, are actually secure at all. Homer's job, which has always been threatened on a comedic level, has in later seasons carried a more genuine undertone of institutional fragility. The plant might close. The industry might restructure. The deal that Abe made with Burns might stop protecting Homer's employment. The specific life Homer has built is dependent on conditions that are not in his control, and that could change without warning. This is the post-industrial American economy as experienced by the people inside it. Not the dramatic crashes of financial crisis, but the low-grade anxiety of a life built on foundations that feel less solid than they used to. Springfield's economy has been a faithful mirror of American economic anxiety for 36 years. When America was worried about debt, Springfield was in debt. When America was worried about job security, Homer's job was threatened. When America was worried about inequality, Burns was blocking out the sun. The show's treatment of class is one of its most consistent and least discussed qualities. Springfield is a working-class town with a working-class community ethic, and the show has never been embarrassed about that. Homer is working class, his friends at Moe's are working class, the plant workers are working class. The teachers and police officers and minor civil servants who make up most of Springfield's population are working class. And the show treats this with the kind of respect that comes from taking people seriously, rather than looking down at them from a comfortable distance. Homer's preferences, his love of beer and television and donuts and football, are not depicted as lowbrow in a way that requires the audience to feel superior to him. They're depicted as the preferences of a person who knows what he likes and has the freedom, within the limited space of his life, to pursue it. There's something in this that runs against the grain of most literary and dramatic tradition, which tends to treat working-class culture as something to be transcended, escaped, left behind on the road to a better life. The Simpsons doesn't traffic in transcendence. Homer is not trying to become something other than what he is. He's trying to be more fully what he already is. And what he is, for all its limitations, is not a failure. It's a person. A specific, irreplaceable, irreducibly human person who loves the people he loves and eats the food he eats and watches the television he watches and goes to sleep on the couch he falls asleep on. The show respects this. After 36 seasons, it still respects this. That's not nothing. In a culture that spends enormous energy telling working-class people that their lives and their preferences are inadequate, that the path to dignity runs through education and ambition and the performance of cultural sophistication, The Simpsons has been quietly insisting for 36 years that Homer is enough. Not perfect, not without flaw, but enough. The American dream's relationship with community is where Springfield gets most interesting and most honest. Communities are not neutral. They shape the people inside them in ways that precede individual choice. The water you drink and the air you breathe and the school you attend and the adults in your neighborhood who model what adulthood looks like, all of these are provided or denied by the community you're born into before you have any say in the matter. And the quality of that provision determines much of what is available to you as you grow. Springfield is a community with spectacular community failures. The water is contaminated. The school is underfunded. The local government is corrupt. The major employer is actively hostile to the well-being of its workers and the surrounding environment. The community's collective decision-making processes have been corrupted by the economic dominance of a single actor who benefits from maintaining the community in a condition of dependency. And yet, and yet people love Springfield. The characters love it, the show loves it, the audience loves it. There is something in Springfield, something in the specific texture of a community where everyone knows everyone, where the history is shared, where even the dysfunction is familiar, that functions as a genuine good even when most of its institutional features are failures. Community is not just its institutions, it's also the accumulated fact of shared experience. The knowledge that Moe's will be open, that the Quick E-Mart will have squishies, that Homer will be in Sector 7G, that the kids will come home from school at 3:30, that the couch will hold everyone, that the same faces will be in the same places tomorrow that they were today. This is what Springfield provides. Not good governance or clean water or quality education. The simple, irreplaceable fact of continuity, of being a place that exists consistently enough for people to build lives inside it. In a world that has spent 36 years becoming less certain, more precarious, more likely to change without warning in ways that displace and disorient, this is no small thing. Springfield is not a good town in any measurable civic sense, but it is a real one. It persists, it shows up, it keeps being there. And in the end, that persistence is what the show is about more than any of the theories. More than the radiation and the coma and the conspiracy and the mystery. More than Burns and the plant and the shooting and the lie. The show is about a place that is always there. A family that is always there. The light in the window on Evergreen Terrace, always on. The couch, always empty until someone sits in it and then full. That's the American dream The Simpsons has been depicting. Not the aspiration, the fact. The ongoing, unremarkable, irreplaceable fact of people who choose, every day, to keep showing up for each other in the specific town they were given to grow up in. It's not glamorous. It's not aspirational. It's not the dream that motivates ambition or generates achievement. But it's warm. And it's real. And 36 years later, it's still there. Section 12. A final walk through Springfield. Everything we didn't get to. There's always more Springfield. There will always be more Springfield. 36 seasons of accumulated mythology means that any attempt to cover it completely will fall short. There are corners we haven't visited, characters we've only glimpsed, storylines we've touched without fully exploring. So let's take a final, slow walk through some of the things that deserve a moment before we close. The Springfield Elementary School play episodes are small, but they're consistently among the most emotionally rich things the show produces. There's something about watching children perform that the show has always understood. The specific vulnerability of a child attempting something too large for them in front of people they need to impress, using skills they're still developing. The gap between the ambition of the performance and the limitations of the performer is the gap where the comedy lives. And it's also where the tenderness lives, because that gap is the gap of childhood itself. The distance between who you are and who you're trying to become. Lisa's saxophone playing is the clearest expression of this in the show's regular run. When she plays, she's not performing for anyone. She's not trying to impress or prove anything. She's just playing. And the sound she makes, imperfect and technically limited as it sometimes is the most honest thing in Springfield. It's the sound of a person in direct contact with what she actually is, unmediated by the expectations and failures and compensations that layer over most human expression. Every time the show gives Lisa a moment with her saxophone, it's giving you the clearest view of what the show thinks is most worth protecting. Not intelligence, not achievement, not even love, exactly. Just the specific thing that makes a person irreplaceable. The specific frequency that only they can produce. The show's relationship with celebrity has been one of its most discussed and least understood qualities. The Simpsons has featured more celebrity guest appearances than any other show in television history. Some of them are brief cameos. Some are extended performances that become among the best things in the episodes that contain them. Michael Jackson, in a performance that wasn't credited as being him at the time, played a man who believed he was Michael Jackson. Leonard Nimoy appeared as himself, playing a version of himself that was simultaneously parodying his cultural position and genuinely inhabiting it. Elizabeth Taylor voiced Maggie's first word, Daddy, in a cameo so brief and so perfectly placed that it became one of the show's most quoted moments. Under the coma theory, these celebrity appearances have a specific explanation. Homer's dreaming brain, absorbing ambient stimuli from the hospital room, the television left on, the voices of nurses and visitors, incorporates cultural fragments into the dream. The celebrities are the names and voices Homer's brain keeps picking up, translated by the dream mechanism into characters who inhabit his Springfield. This is a more interesting explanation than the production one, which is simply that celebrities found it cool and career-enhancing to appear in The Simpsons during its peak years. But the production explanation and the in-universe explanation don't have to be exclusive. A show can use celebrity appearances as a production strategy and simultaneously use them as world-building. The Simpsons has always been good at this, at making choices that work on multiple levels simultaneously. The show's geography, which we discussed earlier in its impossibility, has a specific dimension that deserves a moment of consideration. Springfield's location has been the subject of more fan theorizing than almost any other aspect of the show. Every state in America has been proposed at some point. Every state has been argued for and argued against. The show has provided clues that point in multiple directions and then contradicted those clues in subsequent episodes. But there's a geographical detail that tends to get overlooked in the location debates. The show's landscape, the specific combination of hills and rivers and industrial facilities and suburban neighborhoods, is not random. It has a character. It has the character of a Midwestern or Eastern industrial town in moderate decline. The plant by the river, the downtown that's seen better days, the neighborhoods that are comfortable but not aspirational, the nearby gorge that functions as the town's dramatic geography, the place where things fall and people look down from and occasionally jump. This is a specific kind of American landscape. It's not the Sun Belt, it's not the Mountain West, it's not the coastal cities, it's the interior. The places where the industrial economy was built and then began to hollow out. The places that grew up around factories and mills and plants that employed enough people to sustain a community, and then watch those industries change and contract without quite knowing how to change and contract with them. Springfield has survived this process primarily because of Burns. Because the plant, as corrupt and dangerous as it is, has kept running, has kept providing employment, has kept being the economic foundation that everything else is built on. Other towns like Springfield, towns with the same geography and the same economic profile and the same mid-century industrial identity, have not been so fortunate. Or so unfortunate, depending on how you look at it. Springfield has its plant, it has its Burns, it has its radiation and its safety violations, and its yellow residents and its inability to look honestly at any of this. But it still has a community. The lights are still on, Moe's is still open, the school is still there. There's something in that survival that the show treats with more ambivalence than either pure celebration or pure critique. Springfield has survived because it has compromised, because it has accepted the terms that Burns set, because it has voted, again and again, to keep the lie rather than pay the price of the truth. And the survival is real. The community is real. The warmth of it is real. But so is what it cost. There are characters in The Simpsons whose stories are incomplete by design, whose mysteries are sustained across many episodes as a kind of ongoing project of slow revelation that the show has never quite finished. Sideshow Bob is the most obvious example. His relationship with Bart, which has driven some of the show's most celebrated episodes, is one of the strangest in its catalog. Bob is a genuinely brilliant man who has repeatedly devoted enormous intellectual resources to the murder of a 10-year-old child. The comedy of this is obvious and effective. The psychology underneath it is less often examined. Bob's hatred of Bart is real, but its origins are not purely rational. Yes, Bart exposed him. Yes, Bart ruined his career, sent him to prison, continued to do so repeatedly through the show's run. These are real grievances. But the intensity of Bob's response, the operatic commitment to Bart's destruction, The way he has organized his entire adult life around this vendetta suggests something beyond rational grievance. What it suggests is that Bart represents something to Bob, not just an obstacle or an enemy, but a confrontation with the part of himself that Bob has spent his entire life trying to suppress. Bob is an aesthete, a man of culture and refinement and genuine intellectual achievement, who was reduced by circumstance to being the straight man in a children's television program, to being the target of a pie in the face, to being humiliated repeatedly in front of an audience of children by the mechanisms of a format that he was too sophisticated to be suited for and too trapped to escape. Bart is everything Bob refused to be, crude and physical and present in the body, guided by impulse rather than intellect, celebrated for the exact qualities that Bob found contemptible in himself when they emerged in childhood and worked hard to eradicate. When Bart destroyed Bob's career, he did it with the specific qualities that Bob had decided were beneath him, and Bob has never recovered from the implications. Because what Bart demonstrated, by winning with those qualities, is that the refinement and sophistication Bob spent his life constructing didn't make him invulnerable, didn't make him safe. A 10-year-old with enough moxie and enough low cunning could undo everything Bob had built just by being unapologetically, completely himself. Bob will keep trying to kill Bart as long as the show runs, and Bart will keep surviving. And in the dynamic between them, the show keeps staging the unresolvable tension between culture and nature, between the elaborate self we construct and the simple self that keeps showing through. The show's ending, when it eventually comes, has been speculated about for years. Not the plot ending, the tonal one. The final moment of the last episode, whatever it turns out to be. There are a few things that seem likely, or at least fitting, given what the show has been building. Homer will be on the couch. This feels certain. Whatever else is happening in the final episode, the closing image will be the family on the couch, because that's where they've always been and that's where they always return. The couch is the center of the Springfield universe. It's the point around which everything else orbits. The couch is home in the most fundamental sense, the specific piece of furniture that transforms a house into the place where people gather at the end of the day. The last image will be the family together. This also feels certain. Not because the show is sentimental, though it is, but because the family's togetherness is the fundamental argument of the show, the thing it has been making the case for across 788 episodes. However broken they are, however contaminated and comatose and conspiracy-shadowed and reset-button abusing they might be, they are together. They choose each other. They keep choosing each other. The last sound will probably be laughter. Homer's, specifically. Big and surprised, the way Homer always laughs. As if the thing that has just been said is funnier than he expected. As if the world keeps delivering comedy that exceeds his predictions. Homer's laugh is one of the most distinctive sounds in television history. It's the sound of a man who is genuinely delighted by being alive, despite everything. Despite the plant and the crayon and the radiation and the absent mother and the incompetence and the damage and the 36 years of failing at things and recovering from them, the delight persists. The laugh persists. And that, more than any theory or mystery or hidden depth, is what the show is about. A man who keeps being delighted, who keeps showing up, who keeps choosing the family over the better life, who keeps working the job that doesn't deserve him and coming home to the house that does. That's Homer. That's the whole thing. We started this video at the surface of Springfield with the things everyone knows, the couch and the credits and the plant on the skyline and the family that hasn't aged since 1989. We've gone deeper than most people go, through the yellow skin and the radiation theory and the coma and the shooting and the economy and the religion and the horror and the impossible timeline. And here at the bottom, after all of it, here's what's true. Springfield is a broken place. Its water is contaminated. Its most powerful citizen has spent decades exploiting its most vulnerable ones. Its institutions are compromised. Its community operates through collective denial of realities that would otherwise require radical action. Its residents are shaped by forces they don't understand and can't control, marked by them physically, impaired by them cognitively, loved by them in the strange, involuntary way that you are loved by the place you grew up in. And it is also home. Home to 5 people on a couch who are imperfect in every way that matters and loving in the way that counts. Home to Moe's regulars and Ned Flanders' garden and Otto's bus and the saxophone on the front porch. Home to the worst nuclear plant in the history of fiction and the best possible arguments for why family is worth the trouble. Springfield is broken and real and warm and dark and funny and sad and impossible and entirely familiar. It is the American town. It is the American family. It is America dreaming of itself on a Sunday night, yellow and four-fingered and absolutely unable to stop watching. And the loop keeps floating, and the family keeps sitting on the couch, and Homer keeps laughing at things that are funnier than he expected, and somewhere in Springfield, in the quiet dark after the credits roll, the plant keeps humming. The water keeps running, the lights stay on, and everything is fine. It's always fine.